Hey everyone, how y'all doing? Damn it, every time. Uh, hope everyone's having a great day. Hope everyone had a good weekend. We're back. We got some tea, iced tea this time. I've had this a few times on the channel before. This is that mix. It's rose hip, hibiscus, and apple. It's very, very good. I didn't really like hibiscus for kind of a bit, but eventually, yeah, I came to like it, especially mixed with other stuff. Now the blend is from a local tea maker. That sounds so cool, like when you phrase it that way, but it's just like I don't know, a guy who packages tea. I don't know. I guess he is a tea maker. I don't know. He calls it sour Squidward, but oh my, do I find that name so incredibly stupid. It's a lot of like nerd themed names, so like the peach tea I have from the same place, they call it Princess Peach Tea, which I find less silly. Uh, I don't know. Maybe it's because I didn't really grow up with SpongeBob, but like I don't know, Mario stuff was. I wouldn't necessarily grow up with it, but it was certainly much more a part of my childhood. So maybe I'm more used to it. Such as it is quite good. Made some for friends over the weekend, but they didn't want to hold on to the rest of it, so that's for me. And by they didn't want to, I mean I didn't ask them. I just wanted it, so I took it. I took whatever we didn't have at that party. Also, been having doing some fun stuff for the holiday for Halloween, which is tomorrow. Uh, my girlfriend and I we pied a couple of pumpkins. This time was a little more. We did this last year, but this time it was more pumpkins involved because while the ones we had access to this year were like half the size. But it's really cool and it's neat to have that like oh wow like this seems like the kind of thing that's inaccessible, but no, you can just do it. Maybe that's just me and how I look at things. Like you see things as a product, and sometimes you think, or at least I should say, I think. Sometimes I think, like you can't really make that. And for a lot of things, that's true. Like a pencil, you couldn't make a pencil. There's so much that goes into it. You can't really do it. But pie seems accessible. But then you look at recipes and they're like, well, just use a, whatever pumpkin puree. We went, what if we made our own pumpkin puree? In fact, we started the other way around. Last year when we first gave this a shot, we had gone to a pumpkin patch for Halloween and they let us as part of the package, you get a pumpkin. You get to pick whichever one you like and they even told us that, these ones are good for making pies. And so Amazon King goes, I wonder if we could pie these pumpkins. So we gave it a shot and it's actually really easy. In fact, pureeing the pumpkin's the easiest part. Not that any part of pumpkin pie is particularly difficult. Oh, I guess the crust, but the like specifics of pumpkin pie not particularly difficult. All you really have to do is like get the goop and seeds out of there, which if you like pumpkin seeds, especially roasted pumpkin seeds, there you go. Uh, Literally just pop them in your oven for a bit, and you can have roasted pumpkin seeds. Takes it's pretty easy. A family member of mine likes them. That's why she's like, "Oh, can I have the pumpkin seeds?" Yeah, of course. So you like scoop out the goop and the stringy bits in the seeds after cutting the pumpkins in half. Cover them with foil, pop in the oven for about an hour, and they get all soft. And you can just the scoop out the pumpkin meat, throw it into a blender until it's blended, and there you go. There's your pumpkin puree, easy peasy. Then like the pie crust is the hardest thing. We finally got that down. Oh, my OBS froze up. I hope when my OBS freezes up that it's only on my end and it's coming through fine for y'all. But I do pause just in case. The pie crust we've been having difficulty with. There was we went through a bunch of recipes. Like the first time we pied the pumpkins last year, we just bought a store bought crust, figuring like we had heard how difficult pie crust is. So we're like, we'll just buy a crust from the store, and that was the worst part of it, which was kind of cool. Like we felt like we were doing something right if the pie we made, the worst part of it was the only thing that we bought from the store. So we started making our filling is crazy easy. Just like a few spices, some milk, some eggs, and like the pumpkin puree. You're good. Um, the but then the crust we were having trouble. We tried. So we tried making our own, and the first recipe was like we liked the crust, but it was so hard to work with and didn't make enough, and it got worse because my pie tray is bigger than average. The the ones you get at the store are like 9-inch pie crusts that are very very thin. Mine is much thicker and much wider, probably closer to like 11 or 12 inches, something like that, and very deep. So it makes for a great pie, but we have to mess with a lot of recipes to get the proportions right. So we tried that crust, it didn't work. We tried some other ones. We tried some vegan ones, trying to see if like, hey, maybe we can just have a little less animal product or whatever. But the vegan ones weren't working out so well. But we finally found a good one. Finally found a great recipe, and while we doubled the recipe in worrying that we weren't going to have enough, as it turns out, we didn't have to do that. It makes enough for my pie container. I keep wanting to call it a pie tin because that's what I'm used to hearing, and like especially when you get a store bought crust, it's just an aluminum tin, or I shouldn't say tin, it's an aluminum container. So I keep wanting to say pie tin, but mine is glass. It's very much not a pie tin. So so we're like happy with the crust recipe we have, made the filling, came out great, and I'm mostly just waffling on, give people time to pop in and just talk a little bit, just chat. Hope you all are having a great time, having a great day. Hope your weekend was good. As far as actual Halloween goes, just because it's tomorrow, it's Tuesday, it's the middle of the week. I don't know if we're gonna do anything for it. Uh, maybe I'll just answer the door for trick or treaters. Um, God, kids are so cute. They're like it's so neat to see like the joy of life so thoroughly in a little person. It's neat, especially in Halloween. My friends have some kids, and they get so excited and carving the pumpkins and stuff. It's just wholesome good fun. Well, that all being said, I think I've waffled enough, prattled on for long enough. Let's actually get to what we're doing today. It's been a while since we've done a debate review. I know people like them, and thankfully, modern day debate is a phenomenal source of debates with people that we might not be familiar with. Do they sometimes have like a lot of the same? Um, they sometimes have a lot of the same topics, but that's just because those topics are interesting. And I presume some amount of the time people are requesting either that they have more debates on that topic or requesting to debate on that topic. So it's kind of neat that we have one that doesn't come up super frequently, but we have covered once before on the channel, which is the subject of veganism. Now, those of you who are here remember that last week I tried to do a debate review for this debate, but for whatever reason that I hopefully have solved, my connection wasn't very good and it was coming through all choppy. I was dropping 2/3 of my frames. So we stopped that, figured out what my computer problems were, but now we're back. I do want to get back to it. In that time, or since that moment, well, I did see the first 5, 6, 10 minutes of the debate. I don't remember exactly how long. Um, I could check how far into the debate I am on YouTube, but I've already backed it up to the beginning, so I don't know how far I got in. So like I know a little bit of what's gonna happen, but like I said, just like I don't even think I made it out of the first opening statement, to give you an idea. Also, since then, we had our These Are the Questions on Thursday, which was a ton of fun. Thanks again to Hexic for coming on and doing those. It was his idea, so it's weird to thank him, but it's still like I don't know. Maybe I should maybe instead of thanking him for coming on, I should thank him for letting me do it with him and have these cool conversations. And as it turns out, the topic of veganism came up in part because it was germane to the topic, in part probably because it was on my brain since this debate review I knew was pending. And so some of my thoughts came out there as well. And as we do on this channel, I want to be clear about where my positions are, engage in earnest, as it were. And so I think my position on veganism has refined a bit. And I think that's the case because of the debates we've watched, the one debate we watched, the second debate that I started watching, and the conversation on the subject with Hexic. It wasn't the totality of the conversation. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, one, go watch it. It's a lot of fun. I love those segments. We're going to be doing those pretty regularly, every other week or so. So the next one should be at the ninth, something like that. I believe it's the ninth. And the question was, if trees could speak, do you think we'd still use them for paper? Well, as it turns out, there are a lot of parallels to stuff. That's one of the cool things about these silly questions that we do for these are the questions, which is that they they point to real world impacts and implications. And one of the things that got me thinking was like, well, if trees were sentient, even if they were used for paper or any other resource, seems like it would be a similar matter that veganism attempts to handle, that like movements would pop up. Maybe veganism in that world would include not using trees as a resource, because kind of the idea, which I think is unassailable, is that if you can do otherwise, there is no good reason to cause suffering of another living creature, especially a sentient one. Uh, you know, so long, like, if you can do otherwise. And I say if you can do otherwise because my big issue of what does seems to not come up enough in vegan debates is the idea of ought implies can. I know we've talked about this before. I know it's in my concepts document. I know we've talked about it on the topic of veganism, but for clarity, in case anyone's not familiar or has forgotten, it's the idea that you can't really have an obligation to do something if you are unable to do it. It seems pretty logical, but put into practice, you might not realize some of the implications of that. So, for example, the obvious thing is like, okay, well, I couldn't realistically expect you to, like, you, the individual, to, I don't know, single-handedly solve the problem of racism worldwide. You can take actions to help in that, but you can't be morally obligated to solve that problem in its entirety by yourself. You can merely contribute to it, and that I think you do have an obligation to contribute towards the elimination of racism as a concept, right? Okay, sure. But that's something like pretty extreme. That's like, because it's just so large. How could you? Why does it come up with veganism? Well, because a lot of people, they just can't. They don't have access to what they would need to live a vegan lifestyle in a way that is healthy. As it turns out, humans need a lot of nutritional stuff that we evolved to get from meat. Now, this can be supplemented or replaced in your diet, but that's not trivial. And what's more is it can be pretty expensive, especially in just the way the world currently works. Meat, especially in the United States, is massively subsidized, as I learned on Thursday. And so it means the prices drop, and alternatives to meat, as far as I know, are not subsidized. Maybe they are, and if they are, that's good. I should look into that, actually. Um, but most of the time, the like lab grown meat or whatever, the impossible meat or whatever other alternatives there are, tend to be more expensive, which means if someone doesn't have a lot of money, which a lot of people don't, a huge number of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, which means like any money you can save is usually a good idea. So it becomes a lot harder to engage in to do the better thing, which is to eat the meat alternative, the food that sustains you as well. And I should think, is Hexic brought up a concern of like, well, what if it's like unhealthy? What if it'll give you cancer in 20 years or something? I presume it won't. And these things like have there are regulatory bodies that make sure that you're not introducing something like that into as a product. If there is, that's a different problem. Then yeah, don't eat the thing that will kill you. I'm on board with that. But in the event that like it's just as viable and it doesn't have any negatives, the fact that it's more expensive is prohibitive for some people. So this is why, like I said in the last debate, I don't put the onus on the individual. I think this is a systemic problem. I agree that we should avoid harming animals whenever possible. Part of the problem is for a lot of people it's kind of not possible. Also, there's that idea of like, well, everything is to some extent uh, exploitative or causes harm. It's that meme, right? There's no ethical consumption under capitalism. Now that's not an excuse. That doesn't mean therefore do whatever you want. But like, to put the onus on the individual seems misplaced. The problem is the unethical production, that's what needs to be solved for, and I think that's a systemic issue. So like I wouldn't necessarily, I would be pretty opposed, especially right this second, to criminalizing meat eating, for example. I think that would be a really bad idea. First of all, like what's going to happen to all those cows that already exist? But then also, so many people eat meat, so many people don't have an alternative. Like I know meat, not meat, beans and rice can be a protein substitute, but as I understand, that's not sufficient. You couldn't like sustain yourself completely off of that and still be have proper nutrition. So maybe instead just subsidize the production, the research, development, and production of meat alternatives, these meat substitutes. If someone goes to the grocery store and they see like, oh, this meat substitute is as good as the meat and also cheaper, do you think people are going to prefer the one that comes with suffering? Probably not. And this is what I was saying to Hexic is I think we should make it easier for people to do good things and harder for people to do bad things. And when you do that, more people do more good things and do fewer bad things. That's all it really comes down to. So I would like, so I'm not in favor of like criminalizing meat eating, but I am in favor of subsidizing the meat alternatives, which should uh, diminish the demand for, I guess I'll call it natural meats, and therefore farmers won't need to breed as many cows. You don't have to do a cow genocide. You just go through the normal processes, but like you need fewer and fewer to support the demand, and so you just eventually have fewer cows just because you're not as many are procreating, and that's fine. We could also over time diminish the subsidy on that we provide that the government gives to the meat industry. That would be good, right? Because now it becomes more expensive. Maybe they'll invest in meat alternatives. You could supplement that, by the way. You can reduce the subsidy, but like provide the replacement if you take action towards the production of meat alternatives. Maybe even like subsidize the conversion of whatever facilities you need for the meat industry into facilities that can produce meat alternatives. There's a lot of stuff you can do there, but I think that it all needs to be like systemic as opposed to on the individual. And then the other issue that I take with like the vegan debates that don't really come up is that veganism is frequently defined in like general understanding. And what I mean by that is no one says like this is what I mean by veganism. And so my this criticism I have might not even be relevant, which is that not all animal products are necessarily harmful to the animal. Now, I understand that the animal products industries that exist, industrialized as they are, well, they're pretty bad. There's no two ways about it. I'm not going to pretend like they're not. Chickens are kept in awful conditions. Cows are kept in awful conditions. They're like perpetually pregnant, so on and so forth. Like that's awful. I do not I do not think that's okay in any way. But that is not a necessity of acquiring those resources. The example I gave last time is I know someone who have chickens on their as pets on their property. They keep them safe, they feed them, they make sure they're healthy, so on and so forth. Just like you would a pet, just like the dog you might have or your cat or whatever else. Just they're a pet, and give them love and affection and all this great stuff. And they lay eggs. They're not fertilized, so it's not even like their young are being snatched from them. Eat the eggs. Who's it hurting? In a situation like that, it seems pretty clear. Like you can have animal products without any suffering. In fact, you might even say that like the chickens cared for as they are might be better off. Though I don't love that argument. More importantly, they're not suffering. So what's wrong with it? I don't think I take an issue, and I imagine that vegans, if I put this to them in a debate, probably wouldn't disagree with it either, and would instead point to the fact that that's not how most animal products are come by. But the solution is very different then. It's not that we have to abolish the animal products industries. It's that we need to make sure that they cannot produce their product. They cannot, or they're unable to produce their product, or like disallowed from producing their product while being cruel to the animals. If they're cared for and it's just like, yeah, you just milk your cow and like you sell the milk, whatever, it's not a big deal. Now the problem, of course, is like expense. A lot of the reason why this happens is because it's cheaper to treat animals terribly, and you can produce a lot more, and so on and so forth. Well, then that's the problem that needs to be solved. Maybe there are other issues that need to be dealt with there, but you don't need the suffering isn't necessary. And so to act like it is, I think is well, it's opening the vegan position up for easy critique. There are other things that I'm not sure if vegans take issue with. So stuff like wool, it is an animal product, but also it doesn't need to be produced with cruelty, and in fact, in some cases, shearing the sheep is beneficial for them, right? Like the wool can cover their eyes and they can't see, and it becomes difficult for them to like live their lives. Um, I don't know very much about the wool industry to know like if there is mistreatment of animals there. Probably because that's how industry tends to be, and that sucks. But the problem is the treatment, not the product. So I think the aim is misplaced. And so that's where I am currently. Is like my stance on veganism. I am not myself a vegan. I think it would be better if I were, and I think it would be better. One of the other issues is that people are often made to feel really bad. That can be okay. That can be motivating. And I mean for eating meat or whatever by sometimes just by the existence of vegans. Vegans sometimes don't have to do anything other than mention that like, oh, that's why they're not eating the meat or whatever. Um, and sometimes people will get like this response of like, oh, the meats are telling me I'm a bad person or whatever, even if it's not happening. But the thing is, like, I think the binary is also the problem there. The binary of you're a good person or you're a bad person. I even engaged it a little bit of like encourage people to do good things and to not do bad things. But there are also scales on this. If you, for example, eat meat every day and then you start eating meat only 5 days a week, you've done good. You're eating less meat. You're causing it. You're like you're the impacts of that is like there's slightly less suffering the world on your account. No, the amount to that is very small. This is a systemic problem, as I said. But like, okay, you're doing better than you did before. In any instance where you can supplement your diet and change from eating meat or animal products, that's good, and it should be encouraged. And I think that should be the approach. Um, that said, the people in this debate, I don't know that they're going to do that. Um, the last debate we watched, Alex O'Connor, who I hold in high regard, but did not do well in that debate, put a huge amount of the onus on the individual, and I think that was a huge problem. I think that was a really bad approach. I don't know that Vegan Danes will do that. I've seen very little from him. I think I've seen him in one other interaction, but I don't remember anything about it. And I saw some of his opening. So we'll see what they say. I think I've blathered long enough. Let's get into the debate because we'll be here a while. As I just proved, I talk a lot. All right. Oh, hello. Come on. All right. Peter was giving me some issues there.
Yeah, so I'm not a moral objectivist. I think morals are a relative thing that require a mind. So there's no way for me to say in a mind independent manner that it's required for you to behave in a certain way.
Oh, and I'll try to like have like appraise you of the thoughts I had the last time I watched this, if I remember them. But some of this I'm going to want to just let go because I know it's not that big a deal. So like he's talking about the realism thing. That the thing I do remember saying last time about it was that this was an issue I had when I did a lot of competitive debate, is that you kind of feel like if you're going to make a moral claim that you have to establish a moral framework and justify its use over any other as a necessary part of that. You don't actually have to do that a lot of times, but especially the more you deal with people who do not hold the same views as you, the more I find at least that it feels necessary. You don't really have to here. You can, as a vegan, probably defer to suffering bad. That includes the suffering of animals, and make your opponent say otherwise if they disagree with that. This can be overdone, and I've criticized this before on the channel, where like sometimes you assume, but sometimes people will assume the the person they're talking to has often liberal ideals, but they don't. and it becomes a huge problem. This comes up with like Daniel Hakikachu and some other people. I think even in the competitive debate that we tried to watch the nationals or something, that was a thing that was coming up of okay, but we're assuming a lot about what we think is moral here, and especially because I disagreed with it, it became kind of um, it can kind of an issue for me watching the debate. But in this case, I don't think you have to do that, Vegan Gains. I think you can just be like suffering bad. We can agree on that, and if you don't, we can have a different conversation because like if his opponent, and I don't know anything about Dr. J, so I'm not saying that he is in favor of suffering. I sincerely doubt it. But if he were gonna take that position, then that's what we should be talking about, not the veganism thing, because there's just no point in talking about a consequence if what you're opposed to, if we disagree on such a fundamental thing. So you could just skip this, Vegan Gains.
But if you do have certain moral values,
Oh, also, and I mentioned this last time, Vegan Games looks a little bit like someone I knew personally. And it's like throwing me a little bit. Don't get me like it's not like oh I hate that guy. The guy who reminds me of is someone I got along with famously. I really like that guy. We just kind of fell apart over the years, but a really good dude. But I was just like it's throwing me like he looks so much like that guy, but it's a different person.
in particular, the value of human rights. If you believe that humans should
Maybe I'll be
have
more charitable for
inalienable
that.
rights, then by logical extension, you should believe that animals should also have those same human rights.
So I took issue with this last time. That just does not follow. Human rights are human rights, and there are some things that we might consider human rights that would make no sense to apply to animals. Now, the thing he's talking about is things like like not being the freedom from murder, the freedom from torture, suffering, so on and so forth, uh, the right to sustenance, things like that. Those that on that level, I think he's completely right. That there's no reason why that should apply to humans and not to non-human animals. But there are some things where it doesn't work, and it just makes the argument become weaker when you're putting it in these terms like he is, and it's stuff like okay, well, if you're in favor of democracy, you would think that a hand in the power of in a hand or a voice in the way that you are governed is a human right, and I think that is like I think every human has the right to political to some amount of political power, not more than others by the way, in the in the ability to influence the governance that applies to them, right? That's the point of democracy. I think I phrased that in the weirdest possible way, but you get the idea. So, but like it would be a little weird to say that animals should have the same thing in that they're not they can't understand it, right? Like they don't even know what that is. Kind of in the same way that while we consider that a human right, we don't apply it to children, but children will gain that right, and and if they don't, I consider it, maybe not a human rights violation, but I think, the world is worse for it. It ought to be a human right to have a hand in the strictures that govern you, I don't know.
Unless you're willing to take away certain human rights. The reason for that is I have yet to see any meaningful distinction between humans and animals where someone can actually demonstrate traits that are unique to animals or traits that are lacking in animals.
So he's just making this too broad, right? It's it is intuitively obvious that there are differences between animals and humans. For the purposes of what Vegan Gains is talking about, he's right. There's nothing different from a human and an animal that should deny the animal protections to their safety. No question. But there are definitely differences between what humans and animals can do, and difference like broad differences between them. Most notably, human intelligence. Animals are not non-human animals are not nearly as intelligent as humans, by and large. There are some that are pretty intelligent. Gorillas, dolphins, as I understand, they get pretty smart, but not but not human intelligence, and that is a pretty big difference because, like I mentioned, with the topic of like governance and politics, like they just could not meaningfully participate because they couldn't understand it well enough. Maybe gorillas, possibly, I don't know, but like there are differences, and he's just making it a little too broad. That said, otherwise, what he's doing is something I was mentioning he could do earlier, and I think he's doing it well, which is put the onus on his opponent to disagree with him about some of the stuff of like, he's saying like you'd have to make an argument for why both humans and animals should be deprived of, well, in this case, he's talking about like the right to life. Now there are some people, uh, rare though they are, who will argue like, oh, humans were given dominion over animals by God and therefore have the right to do with them what they will, and they don't even have souls or have feelings anyway. So it's pretty rare, and making an exception for it in his argument would be a bad idea. But if Dr. J does want to take that position, which again I don't know anything about him, I don't know that he will. In fact, I doubt it because these people are pretty rare. Like, make him say that out loud. Don't make the exception for it. Make him say, "Oh, it fails because I think they're like, they're not even sentient or whatever." And it's been pretty conclusively shown that yes, animals feel pain. They have emotions, and whether or not there's a soul, I'll leave that to the more religious among you.
that are not lacking in human beings,
Also,
to
there's a cute
where
fluffy dog, and I enjoy
you
seeing the cute
wouldn't
fluffy dog.
you wouldn't have an issue with taking away rights from humans. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. It's called Name the Trait. So my challenge to my debate opponent
And
is
this was a
name a
good challenge.
trait
I do
that is
remember this.
lacking in animals. That if lacking in human beings, you would be comfortable with taking away rights from human beings. And since we're talking about
So it's a good challenge, but phrased badly. He's making the conclusion too broad. It's taking away rights from human beings. There are absolutely things that we would all agree if a human did not have that trait, or because an animal doesn't, that they shouldn't have certain rights. Most notably, social rights. So like, if someone goes into a coma, I think we would agree that we shouldn't be like trying to figure out how they're gonna vote or whatever, or like, they're like power of attorney is a thing that can like be given to someone else because if you are unable to make decisions for yourself because you've lost intellectual capability. The thing is, it doesn't apply to what he's talking about. He's just not saying specifically. He shouldn't say like the taking away rights. He should say taking away the right to life, the right to the freedom from torture. That's what he's talking about, and there is, I agree, absolutely nothing, no trait that humans have, um, or even or that humans lack that would justify taking away the right to life or the right to freedom from torture. It's like a lot of the sustenance rights.
animal ethics, that would mean you'd be okay with turning human beings into hamburgers. So
That would be, by the
again,
way,
it
a hilarious take if Dr. J ran with it and was like, yeah, sure, make human burgers. That's a bad idea, obviously, but it would be pretty funny of like, I see that you're right. There's no difference between humans and animals. Humans should also have this happen to them. You would be wrong, of course, but oh wow, would that be a very funny retort?
you may end up biting the bullet and finding certain traits that are lacking in animals, that if lacking in human beings, you're comfortable with taking away rights from human beings, but you are going to have this sort of moral issue where you either have to grant rights to animals, the same rights that humans have,
Also, what the hell is going on
or
the left of the
you
screen
are
right now?
going to have to take away rights from human
Or on the
beings in
right,
order
excuse me.
to justify meat eating. And I do think that is an unavoidable consequence of justifying meat eating.
So this is where I think he's actually wrong, because that's not true. Well, I guess maybe he's not necessarily wrong, but we can find the clear exception that kind of collapses the argument, which is that if that is what is needed for you to survive, it is reasonable then to strip some of these rights that he's talking about, like the right to life and whatever. Now, I don't mean in the sense of like how often like bigoted people will pretend the existence of like the other is an attack on them and therefore they have the right. No, that's obvious bullshit. I mean, like, literally, if you will die if you don't eat the like thing that's next to you, yeah, I think it's reasonable. I've mentioned before, I'll mention again, I do not think it is a person is it is I don't think it is possible for a person to have a moral obligation to die or a moral obligation to not sustain themselves. There are different extents to that. You can't, you know, because you're hungry doesn't mean you get to do whatever the hell you want. But I think it is reasonable. This is why, like, the obvious answer to would you steal to feed your family is so obvious because it's, well, how could you have a moral obligation to protect someone's property over keeping people alive, right? And so for if you're in a position where, well, I can't afford to feed myself because things are too expensive unless I eat the meat products because that's much cheaper, much more accessible, especially in like food deserts or whatever where you have very few options on what you can eat. I don't think it's wrong for a person to do that. And suddenly it all comes because now vegan gays might say, well, shouldn't that apply to humans as well? Well, as it turns out, it does. We've like if anyone's familiar with the Donner Party, it was a group of people traveling westward across the United States, got trapped in a snowstorm, they couldn't move, they ran out of food, and they started eating each other. I don't think, I mean, I wouldn't be comfortable calling them moral monsters for doing that. It's what choice did they have? What other choice did they have to survive? And survival, I think, is a fundamental right that any living creature has, animals included. It's also why it's not immoral for predator animals to eat meat because they need to survive. They don't really have a choice. This doesn't collapse veganism, but it does collapse his argument of like, well, no, there is an exception. The problem is like he's approaching it like kind of too broad, um, and like again on an individual level. Even though I mostly agree with this position, this is what drives me insane about these vegan arguments is that I'm so close to agreement with veganism, but their arguments like just don't work, and the focus is so frequently in the wrong place.
So that's my
You
opening statement.
okay?
You
So
got it. Thank you very
this is
much
about as far
for
as
that
I've
opening
seen. I
statement,
have
Vegan
not heard from
Gains.
Dr.
We
J
are going to
yet,
kick it
so
over
now
to
we are
Dr.
not
J. First
pre-watched
time here,
anymore. We
thrilled
didn't
to
get
have
very
you.
far.
Want to do a couple of quick,
Yeah,
quick
literally
housekeeping
just a
things
couple
first.
of minutes.
First, folks, 8Con4 in,
I'm
one
gonna
to
skip
J.
past there.
All right.
Oh,
So
I
I
didn't
want
know
to
you had a
talk a little bit
presentation.
about whether veganism is morally required, and I have a little
Oh yeah, and the
presentation.
actual subject of is veganism morally required? My answer to that question, I forgot. I was answering more like the idea of vague veganism than the specific question. My answer to that question depends wholly on on the thing that's unstated there, which is required by whom. If it's on an individual, it can be morally required. I would say, for example, that someone like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, someone with more money than they could ever spend in their life, who could trivially eat vegan, especially since they probably don't prepare their food. They probably pay people to do that. That person, they definitely have a moral obligation to uh, to to eat vegan. They also have moral obligations to do a lot of things they don't do. I think those people tend to be pretty evil, actually. But the point is pretty clear. But someone who's, for example, living in poverty and can't afford otherwise, no, I don't think it's morally required of them. But if we're talking about, more importantly, society, then yes, veganism is definitely morally required. I don't know what the hell just happened there.
Here. So the
Um, and that's the problem. I think the problem is scope and focus. I think vegans in this debate would be far better off if they made this a conversation on social practice and systemic issues than the individual of like, well, are you personally doing something wrong? But I don't care. The important thing is whether like people are often unable to, and so the solution is to make them more able to. And at the point, and if society were in a state where you could go to the grocery store and you know, money wasn't a problem. You don't even go to, you know, it's not even a store. You just like go to like wherever, like you can just pick up food or whatever. If money weren't an issue in this case, and you could, or actually even if money is an issue, I guess I've added complexity for no reason. If you could go to the grocery store and like the meat alternative is exactly as nutritious or more nutritious as the natural meat and it's cheaper, I think everyone would be morally required to choose the one that doesn't come with suffering. But that's not where we live. That's not the world we live in. And acting like it is just makes this more difficult for what is ostensibly the morally correct position, in my opinion.
First idea, I just define veganism. I don't think this is going to be an issue or an argument or
And
whatnot.
why is the non-vegan defining veganism? It's not a problem of Dr. J. It's a problem that he's the only one who's tried to do this. If Vegan Gains had defined it, Dr. J maybe would have just skipped this slide because it's not necessary. His opponent answered it, or maybe they're on the same page or whatever else. But he's the first person.
Sometimes
Yeah,
it can be in debates where people can't agree on what you're arguing about. I'm not super sure that is an issue, but the practice of eating only food
My guess is
derived from
Vegan Gains
animals
will
and typically avoiding the use
agree
of
mostly with
other
this
animal
definition. He might
products.
only
So
have
my understanding
slight
of veganism
disagreements.
normally does involve not using animal products as well. Is veganism morally required? That's what we're discussing tonight. And so I don't think
I
this is
disagree with the
controversial, but
statement on the slide. Most ethical systems start with human freedom and restrict those freedoms. That is not the case, but most people are in agreement. Like most people who live in more liberal, and I mean like big L liberal countries, are going to look at morals, ethical systems in this way. But no, that's not always the case at all.
most moral or ethical systems sort of start out with the
Or
idea
it's
that
not
humans
most of the
have
time.
freedom. So, are you allowed to breathe? Well, yeah, of course you're allowed to breathe. Are you allowed to, whatever? Yeah, you're allowed to do it. And then what morals normally do is cause
If
restriction,
that seems
So,
weird
okay,
to you, by the way, that not that I disagree that most ethical systems start with this assumption. You can think of, for example, like I don't know, maybe divine command theory isn't even always like that, but we can imagine a version of divine command theory where the belief is you are allowed to do only what God allows you. It is not that you are free to do anything and we place restrictions. It is you are free to do nothing unless you are told that you're allowed to do this. This was actually something that the Ninth Amendment in the United States Constitution actually sought to make sure wasn't an interpretation of the Constitution. It basically says that any rights not enumerated here are protected unless prohibited elsewhere. Basically, to say yes, we have declared that you have the right to free speech, but we haven't said that you have the freedom to travel, for example. You do have that freedom, even if it's not written here. There would have to be a law that prohibits it. That Ninth Amendment is this statement codified with the understanding that like, well, if we didn't say that, maybe it could be read the opposite way. It's not necessarily the case.
well, you can't
That people
murder
think this way.
someone or you can't steal, and they take restriction down a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. So, sort of my default position, I think the default position of most moral theories, and maybe all,
And what
I,
he's
I
saying is
obviously don't know them all
reasonable.
in depth,
I just disagree
but I
about
think
like
is
the
that you sort of
irrelevant
start out with
part of it.
people are free, people can do what they want, and then we restrict those. So I think that most ethical systems start with human freedom and restrict those freedoms.
Yeah, I don't know about most ethical systems,
So,
but I think most people do
how
think
do
that
we
way
understand
now. So,
restricting human freedom? What are the
or at
ways
least
in
in
which
in the
we
context that you'll
restrict
talk to
human
them.
freedom? Well, one of the ways is,
And this is what I mean about like we're answering a moral question. Do we have to like do all this like all the mega philosophy of like, all right, what system of ethics are we gonna go? Which one is supported? Yada yada, etc. It's just like we can I think skip a lot of this. But here we are.
no, moral theory of utilitarianism, and so this is the idea of max good
And I
versus
didn't
max
explain this
bad, or
because I
there's
figured he was
different
gonna do
versions of
this.
utilitarianism that
Also, okay, well, he did describe what it is, but that's just not what it means. Utilitarianism is the idea of what is good is what provides the greatest good for the greatest number. There are problems with that, and there are solutions to those problems. There's lots and lots and lots of philosophy about it. I'm not going to get super into it, but the broad scope is the good is what provides the most good for the greatest number of people. Well, shouldn't even say people, for the greatest number.
kind of have different ways they do it, but it's a very practical way to try to say, hey, what does the most good in the world, and what limits the
Oh, okay.
most
It gets
bad.
to
And
something
I
closer.
realize you can get in tricky
And
situations
I
with
think
toilet
most people
problem and all
think a
that or whatnot. But
utilitarian
anyway, utilitarianism is a
in a
general idea.
utilitarian way
Then you
a
have
lot.
deontology, and that's sort of a universal good. Sometimes people might call this Kantianism.
So
And
deontology would be more like a thing can be good like in concept, and that makes it good, irrespective of like the consequentialism of it. It's not necessarily it's these things aren't going to necessarily replace each other in that way. That's just not how moral philosophy or ethical philosophy necessarily works. This would be more in contrast to something like consequentialism, where the good of an action is determined by its consequences or its foreseeable consequences, whereas deontology is like it is wrong from first principles. Something like lying, like you don't have to see the like a deontologist might say, irrespective of the consequence of lying, it was a wrong thing to do, even if that consequence is like, well, you're lying to keep someone safe or something, you know. But of course, then like that gets built in. It's really complicated. It's not super important, but we're here.
that's a
So.
way you do it. So contract theory, great and everything. It's going to get very complicated, but that's kind of another way to try to set.
Yeah, he's right to slide past it like that. Social contract theory is the basic idea that in society you enter into an unwritten contract wherein you agree to give up some number of your rights in exchange for certain protections and interaction with society. This seems most obvious. This seems obviously true in some cases, but not the case in others. The really obvious one is like without any government or any society, you would be free to, for example, murder, but you give up the freedom to murder in exchange for the freedom or for the protection from being murdered and participation in a society where that is prohibited. That like that's a very basic example of what people mean by social contract theory, but it gets crazy complicated. That's like the very simple
Moral
one.
norms, and the other is divine
again,
command theory,
between
which
all
of
of
course
these,
just says you have
thousands
some
of years
sort
of
of deity
philosophy.
or text or whatnot,
And then
in
divine
order
command
to sort
theory
of
should be
say that
obvious.
your way is right or
Do
not.
what God says
So
to do, you know.
my view, which is I think going to be kind of boring,
Shit.
and not
We do
super
have a
interesting
divine command
to
theorist.
debate,
Fuck.
is I would take the divine command theory, but my moral basis doesn't really matter much because I'm not trying to limit human freedom. I think
Okay, I see why he's going. Okay, this is actually pretty dishonest. I did not expect him to approach it this way, given how he had started. But like, wow. So I'm already seeing where he's going. He's seeing like, oh, okay, my moral bias, like like his view that divine command theory, is like how like is a real and should be a preferred version of ethics doesn't matter because he's not trying to restrict people. This is the game that creationists do all the time now. Maybe he won't do it the same way. But it's the idea of like, oh, well, I'm not trying to say we shouldn't do a thing, therefore it doesn't matter. You're saying you are trying to but like he already knows and has accepted and agreed to the idea that a lot of freedoms it is reasonable to restrict, and it like he's basically being like, well, I'm opposed to what my opponent's suggesting in principle, which is the restriction of human freedom. When he's actually okay with the restriction of human freedom, I'm sure I'm sure Dr. J likes that people aren't free to murder each other. I'm guessing that is a thing he is a fan of. So he's in favor in principle with the idea of restricting human freedom. What he's actually objecting to is the specificity of restricting this freedom. And so, but, has set himself up to basically imply like a disagreement in principle. I hate this. This is like one of my personal pet peeves. Once I started noticing it, it drives me insane. So we'll see how much he continues with it, but that's so far the argument he's made.
That we should be free unless we're told we can't be free. And so I'm basically saying do whatever you want unless I have a moral reason to stop you from doing it.
By the way, Vegan Gains could agree to that statement. I don't know if he does. He probably does. But like he could agree. I'm willing to let people do whatever if there isn't a good reason. But like Vegan Gains has been laying out the reasons why this freedom should be restricted. Some freedoms are better for everybody if we don't have them. The obvious one I keep mentioning is the freedom to murder. You don't have that in most societies, and that's really, really good for the world.
Because I'm not in this debate trying to restrict human freedom.
Not all restrictions are bad.
I don't have to sort of say why I'm letting you be free. Free is the
and also
the
like
kind
the incredible irony of a divine command theorist being like, I'm not trying to restrict your freedom. Divine command is frequently the most restrictive and authoritarian moral paradigm possible, right? It's just like, well, God says don't do this, so you can't. Like, not even for reasons, just like my invisible sky daddy says you can't do this, so
kind of the default. So if my moral basis is wrong and my divine command theory and where I get my divine commands ends up being silly or dumb or
And by the way, because we're talking about specifics and not principle, even though he's pretending like it is, his divine command theory matters greatly because what he will or will not consider wrong and worthy of a restriction is rooted in his moral system, which he has just said is this divine command theory. He hasn't laid out which divine command, by the way, which makes it as nebulous as possible. It's basically stating a moral theory without stating a moral theory. But he's absolving himself of having to actually talk about is there anything wrong with meat eating by just being like, well, you're just trying to restrict freedoms and you have to justify that even though I agree with it.
inaccurate, and I assume nobody wants a theist versus atheist or whatever debate tonight. It doesn't really matter because I'm not really trying to restrict
And also,
human
we don't
freedom.
know if Vegan Gains is an
And
atheist. Maybe he
secondly,
does. I have
I'm
no
willing
idea.
to accept another moral theory and assume it's
And
true.
it wouldn't matter.
So tonight, I don't need to defend my moral theory.
You
I
do,
think Vegan Gains is going to have a moral theory. He's going to suggest what it is, and he may very well be right
well,
in
he's
that
already
moral
started
theory.
to do that. This
then
is
in
why, by the way, like overly scripting your negative is a problem. He's responding. He's acting as though like if he was speaking first, this would make a lot of sense, but he's not. And so he's like, well, we'll see if Vegan Gains like has reasons why. He already did. He said that Vegan Games was very clear in the fact that he has arguments and what they are. I disagree with how some of them are framed, but I think once we apply proper like interpretation and charity, he's correct and has made strong arguments. Now, I'm not going to say Dr. J is implying he hasn't made any arguments at all intentionally. I don't think he's doing that. I think it's just he has a scripted opening that, because it went second, doesn't make any sense and ends up implying that Vegan Gains has made no arguments.
In that moral theory, he should be able to explain to us why he thinks that
And he has.
veganism's wrong, and he may be very well be successful in that. I know he's done a number of these debates.
This
and
is
I'm
also
sure
why,
he's
like,
thought through this
don't
well.
do defense in your opening. We've talked about this before, right? Offense is an argument that supports the position. Defense is an argument that attacks your opponent's position, or and so this kind of argument of like, well, he has to like make arguments. That is a defense, right? To say my opponent has not substantiated the position, but you're doing it in an opening where he hasn't. Well, one, he has done that, and two, like, and then if he hasn't spoken yet, well, he hasn't had a chance, right? This shouldn't be here. This is just the wrong kind of argument for this.
But what I'm going to suggest is I think it's hard, if not impossible, to have a consistent practical moral theory that does include veganism. And so I am going to try to demonstrate that it is not really possible /
because this guy's a divine command theorist, do you think he is going to say veganism? Like God gave us dominion over animals, so like fuck it, we can
just
do
as a little final statement, we should not consider veganism morally required and restrict human freedom.
Notice here he actually hasn't argued for this at all. He has said only, well, my opponent will have to justify restricting freedom, which is true. He has done that, but like you also are okay with restricting freedom. But like he hasn't made a single argument why it wouldn't be. Just saying like my opponent has the burden of proof. That's more or less his whole argument, but also done in kind of a dishonest way. He like implying a burden of proof that his opponent doesn't have because we're in agreement. We both, like everyone here agrees that restricting human freedom can be acceptable. Now we're arguing about whether it's acceptable here, and he's made no comment on that.
Freedom based on that requirement. And so if human freedom includes animal freedom in that, we would need a demonstration that human freedom and animal freedom are the same thing. I don't need to demonstrate it or not demonstrate it.
This is going to be a huge problem going.
And so that's kind of how
this is going to be a huge problem. If both positions seem reasonable, and I'll lay out what those positions are. Vegan Games would say there is no reason to consider humans particularly different from animals, and therefore any reason to say that one should have a different slate of protections than the other. Where Dr. J has basically said there's no reason to think that animals and humans are the same, and therefore no reason to think that they should have the same protections. Now, I think it is far more defensible to say the former, but like you have to go into a lot of stuff. Like I don't know, it's like both just as a statement. That one from Dr. J sounded reasonable, even though it sounded just as reasonable from Vegan Gains. One of them, like they can't both be right, and you can argue for it, but the presumption of correctness in it, I didn't expect Dr. J to just say the opposite back at him. I guess the question that's rattling around in my brain now is, what would a reasonable response to this be? Like if I were in Vegan Gains' shoes, which he's the person in this debate with whom I most agree, I'm like most of the way to agreeing completely with veganism, just not entirely there. Like maybe the response would be like, we're all animals. What is relevantly different between? Oh, no, he did that. Never mind. He did that. He has the name the trait challenge. Never mind. Vegan Gains has already preempted this. Like, he's probably had these debates a lot. His channel name is Vegan Gains. Like, he probably does this all the time. So, he has preempted and expected this and laid out his, like, the challenge of what is the thing that makes humans relevantly different for animals that these protections shouldn't apply to both. And by the way, protections, now that I've come to it, is probably the word that he should be using rather than rights. One sounds better, and two is a lot harder to attack because, like, there are rights that seem very obvious that animals shouldn't have that humans should based on intelligence, but protections, I don't know about that.
How I look at this issue, and so I look forward to continue to talk about whether this human freedom should be restricted or not, and for what reasons.
And I think we see here part of why, to like the topic of the scripted opening, this is why in competitive debate, at least in Lincoln Douglas debate, which is what I did, there's a difference in structure that might seem like irrelevant or might seem like it exists for other reasons, but is really good for this issue specifically. The affirmative speaks for 6 minutes. Then there's cross examination or whatever. Then the negative speaks for 7, but those 7 minutes are to be divided between an opening, which is expected to be shorter than the affirmative opening by a lot. You expect it to be like 3 minutes, about half as long. And then the rest of it is rebuttal. And that makes a lot of sense when you see it here of like, he's acted like he has this opening where he should be responding somewhat to his opponent based on the issues at hand, but he didn't, and then acted as though like his opponent hasn't really said anything, but he has, and like I don't know, it feels like the initial opening kind of gets left on the table. There should be an expectation, I think, of the same thing with these online debates as well. I know like formal academic debates where like the whole thing goes on for like an hour and a half in an auditorium has the same like we both do our openings thing, but I don't know how much there's an expectation of response or whatever, but there should be more of that. We want to get into the back and forth, want to get into argumentation, and like there's only so much you can really say that's offense like that can fill this time. Like we saw he didn't make an argument at all. Respond to your opponent then. Yeah, I don't know.
You got it. Thank you very much for that opening, Dr. J. Want to let you know, folks, I just mentioned it. DebateCon 4.
Okay, we're going to skip the
event.
Plugs.
Like James, that fundraising photo.
Also, James is like really quiet compared to the other two.
All right, well, the first thing I wanted to point out is you defined veganism wrong.
Okay.
Veganism isn't a diet or an idea that you need to eliminate animal products from your life. Veganism is defined as animals having the same rights as human beings.
Oh, hold on. Hold on there. I'm not sure if that's accurate to like how veganism is used. I don't know. Maybe that's how he uses it, but I would definitely disagree. I would definitely disagree in that with that definition. This is obviously Google's not going to give us a perfect answer here, and we should accept what Vegan Gains is using as his definition for his position because that's what he's trying to defend. I'm just trying to see if this is common in understandings of veganism. The practice of eating only food not derived from. Okay, yeah, actually, Dr. J's argument is straight from Google. definition, excuse me, is straight from Google. Again, that doesn't mean that that's what it means, right? Anarchy is a great example of something like that. It's like state of disorder or whatever, but like the original, due to absence of non-government, most people use it as a state of society where there is no governance. But the original definition is not that at all. It's just a society without hierarchy and rulers, but still with government. So like I understand that this isn't going to be necessarily the correct definition of how it's used. I've just never heard anyone use it the way Vegan Gains just described, and there are huge problems with that definition of like there are definitely rights. Like when you say there are no rights that should be different between animals and humans, it seems insane when there are political rights to be considered, right? Unless the only rights that Vegan Gains is talking about is like freedom from murder and torture or whatever, and like the like I don't know, the right to food and water and shelter or whatever. Like even those, like I don't know, maybe. But he leaves it kind of nebulous, and it's obvious that there are some rights that animals should not have that humans do, especially when it comes to, like I said, social society and governance. Wow, I would not expect. Okay, yeah. I just
So just wanted to clear that up.
Happy to take that definition.
Sure.
This is, by the way, remember I said Dr. J would likely just take whatever definition Vegan Gains is. I don't think he was presenting his, even like we saw some dishonesty in the back half of his opening, but like when he had that definition, I didn't think he was trying to insist on this definition so much as like, well, we'll provide one because we should have one. And like we see here, happy to take Vegan Gains definition. You know, you're the proponent. I'll let you define what you mean by what you support, and there you go. And I think it's important to note when people are engaging in good faith and behaving properly there. I think that's good on Dr. J there. Yeah, okay. Happy to take your definition. We can move on.
Secondly, you claimed that you believe in human freedom. Do you believe in human rights?
I think it depends on what you mean by human
What
rights.
does it matter whether I believe in human rights or not?
Well, because we're discussing
I'm not
ethics.
trying to restrict people's freedom.
Yeah,
Do you believe
he's
in human
doing the
rights? I
thing.
mean, you got to prove to me.
I'm just
So by the way, it does matter because the restricting freedom on the basis of human rights is the kind of thing that like, well, Vegan Gains could ask about immediately after, but most people are already on board for, and I think Dr. J would be on board for it. This is what we were talking about of like, you have the right not to be murdered, so restricting the other people's freedom to murder protects your human rights. You would probably be in favor of that, and so we can move to the next step. Like, but he's I don't know.
I want to know your ethical values. So do you believe like I
This
should
is-
have a right to rape your mom?
Whoo!
So-
Whoo, that got way spicier than it needed to, but oh my god. Like, all right. All right. It's so deadpan with how he said it, too. Jeez. All right.
I explained, and I can explain it again.
The answer to
but
this, of
I
course, no.
think you're trying to convince you.
So, see, he wants to... Yeah, this is really dishonest, actually. Like, I don't know if he's doing it on purpose or not. This is the, like... this is the Kent Hovind thing of, like, creationists will often be like, well, listen, I'm not trying to say creationism is right, but you're the one trying to teach it in schools. It's like, yeah, because, like, I want to do good things and not do bad things. And so, just like here, you agree, Dr. J, that the restriction of human rights is reasonable. He hasn't said as much, but you could very easily get him to that. And Vegan Gains is trying to demonstrate it, and he's just avoiding the question. Now, Vegan Gains, you could just outright say, do you think it is reasonable ever to restrict human freedoms? And then when Dr. J says no, you'd be like, okay, then you can ask, like, do you think I have the right to... I'm not going to say it. And if he says yes, then we're like, okay, cool. Then we should work out what things we have we can restrict human freedoms on the basis of. Vegan Games was like trying to do that, and it wasn't wrong, but maybe the direct question would work better here.
Convince everybody that your moral theory is right without actually demonstrating you have a moral theory. So I would love to hear yours.
Well,
but
no,
I'm happy to give you mine.
and so now Dr. J has demanded two things at once. It is to simultaneously demonstrate that human freedoms can be restricted and that can be good, and that what you're suggesting is a reasonable basis for restricting human freedoms is correct. But you can't do both of those things at once because you need to, like, how do I explain this? Vegan Gains would have to try to demonstrate that it can be right to restrict human freedoms with the question about raping Dr. J's mom. But Dr. J wants to will say, okay, but that you're not demonstrating that it's reasonable to restrict it on the basis that you want to. But then if he talks about the animal issues, well, now you haven't demonstrated that it's okay to restrict human freedoms. You kind of have to do them separately, because if you try to do them both at once, you're just doing the whole argument. And yeah, I don't know how to explain this. Yeah, you just basically each conversation should probably be segmented. To do both at once makes it impossible to discuss anything. You're handling too many variables, you know.
Well,
so
I feel I've explained that poorly, but hopefully you
go
understand
ahead,
what I'm
sorry.
talking about.
Didn't mean to cut you
So
off.
in my presentation, I said divine command theory, which I'm sure you're aware of, is that a deity says that this is right or this is wrong. And so in my theory, the deity says that humans are made in the image of God, and therefore, because they're made in the image of God, there's something special and there's something unique to animals.
Do you see, by the way, how his morals actually do matter a lot for this conversation? But he was trying to, I don't know why he stopped, but he was trying to run away from that relevance up until this point. But the fact that he thinks humans are made in the image of God and therefore have special rights and protections is incredibly relevant to this discussion. I don't know why he was pretending otherwise. Well, I do know why, but it is, he should have understood why he shouldn't be doing that.
Animals. Now, that could be wrong, but I'm not trying to restrict people's freedom. So,
Well,
and
you are, right? So that's Vegan Gains can very easily say you are trying to restrict people's freedom. You're restricting, maybe not people's. Maybe you are trying to restrict freedom. You can rephrase it. It's a little dishonest, but fuck it. This guy's going much harder on that. You can say, no, you do think it's appropriate to restrict freedom. You think it's appropriate to remove, cows' freedom from murder. You are trying to do that. There's nothing it's all trade-offs. Freedom to comes at a cost of freedom from. At the very least, that's how I look at freedoms. And what I mean by that is what I've been discussing. Your freedom to murder comes at a cost of your freedom from being murdered, and those both allow for a level of for an amount of freedom. And I think the latter is greater. In some cases, being less able to take an action gives you greater freedom from not having that action imposed, done to you or whatever. Now, in this case, that's not really happening because we're talking about freedom to eat meat or whatever. But also, no one's actually not even. Wow, I even fell into what an assumption Dr. J was making. I only just now realized it. Vegan Gains hasn't said anything about restricting freedom. He's saying it's morally required. It is better if you don't. Your freedom is not restricted. You can still do that. It's just wrong for you to do it. And there are lots of things like that. I don't know. You can call that a restriction on human freedom if you want, but don't do bad things is the most reasonable restriction on human freedom possible,
So this is why
and so
I
that's
would
why
have
it should be just,
between
is
the
this
two.
bad or not?
But you need to provide a distinction between the two, or a non-distinction between the two, in order to demonstrate
he's tried to
that
do that, but you also don't engage.
that everyone's wrong, or not everyone, but that people are wrong.
The non-engagement for Dr.
trying
J
to say
is
that
overwhelming me at the moment. This is more than we're used to seeing.
shouldn't be required for everyone. It might be a good idea, or it might be healthy, or it might have a lot of positive attributes or whatnot. But so is not smoking, or so is exercising every day.
And by the way, there are restrictions on smoking. There are taxes. People under 18 in the United States, at least, are disallowed from doing it. And people are trying to restrict more and more because it is really bad for people, not just the people who smoke, but for society as well. You can't smoke on planes. You can't smoke in restaurants. You used to be able to, by the way. You can't smoke indoors in a lot of places. There are lots and lots and lots of restrictions on that because of the harm it causes. So it's a really bad example, Dr. J.
Whatever.
Okay, so it sounded, I have two questions for you. It sounded like you sort of named a trait there. You said humans are made in the divine image of God, but animals are not. That's your belief?
So
I kind of like what Vegan Gaze is doing here. First of all, his demeanor is very, very good. People just are the way they are, but it comes off as very. He comes off as very measured and thoughtful, which is helpful with how much like obfuscation his opponent has run out. And just say, okay, let's pick out the thing that is actually relevant to the conversation, which is, okay, you've given me something I can talk about. I made this challenge of the name the trait challenge. What should make there be a difference? Let's interrogate that, and just like not let him pretend like his moral system doesn't matter, which he just tried to do, and instead, Vegan Gains is demonstrating why it does matter and arguing, and making an argument based on the fact that it does matter and what his moral system actually is. That's really smart.
Divine
I
command
like it.
theory means you get your morals and ethics from the Bible, and so that's what the Bible says. And or it doesn't have to be the Bible; it could be any religion. So therefore,
okay,
if you
so this is another disingenuous thing. He's saying it doesn't have to be the Bible; it could be any religion. But obviously, he doesn't believe that, right? Because he doesn't think that like eating pork should be made illegal because it's prohibited in both Judaism and Islam, right? He's a Christian. He's arguing for one specific divine command. This is again just trying to run away from the fact that his beliefs are relevant here. So that's why he's trying to, but like obviously that's just straight up a lie, right? He specifically believes in these divine commands.
reject the Bible, it's okay. But you seem to not be willing to recognize my premise here that I'm not trying to
He
restrict
keeps
people,
running from it.
that
Damn
you
it.
are.
Vegan
And you're
Games was
somehow
so good
to
trying to
use
hold on to
my
something,
ethical
but he's
theory
running.
in order to prove your ethical theory right, which is kind of backwards.
So no, it's not, because like he's trying to do this. This is what I mean about like you can't do both at once, and he's gonna fight you on doing one at a time. He's trying to demonstrate like this is an axis on which this is an axis in which I can demonstrate a harm is being caused. You can follow that up with, okay, we should restrict human freedoms when it comes to doing harms, or like he's trying to do this, but like Dr. J is like, nope, you're not doing both, so you can't do either.
To prove that your ethical theory is right, whether mine's right or not.
I guess basically like maybe a better way to put it is an argument any one argument can only be to demonstrate one thing. So to demand that an argument prove two things basically makes it impossible. Now, you can have multiple arguments that prove the different parts of it, but Dr. J has been fighting Vegan Gains as he's trying to do that. Like, he's trying to make the argument, he tried to make the argument of like, okay, well, we can restrict human freedoms when it comes to human rights, right? And he's like, well, no, but then you're not proving, like, yeah, like you have to approach them one at a time.
Okay, well, the only way to really debate morals is to test logical consistency, in my opinion. Like I don't understand.
And you're pressing morals upon other people, right? You're putting
well,
moral
again,
on
like,
people that I'm not.
Again, the irony from a divine command theorist to like complain at someone else trying to impose morals, but like, yeah, all moral argumentation is saying I believe this thing and I think you should believe it too. You can call that an imposition if you want, but like Vegan Gains is not an authoritarian who's like wielding the power of the state to make illegal the things you want to do. He is making an argument that the world would be better if people respected the rights of animals. That's his argument. It's not an authoritarian. It's not imposing his will upon you. He's making an argument, and if you agree with him, then you can act accordingly if you want. But all he's doing is trying to prove a philosophical point.
No, I'm not. So do you not?
So you have no issue with somebody? So sorry, you have no issue with somebody, say, like murdering an entire village of people?
I explained
like,
this
you don't have
already.
any issue with
divine command theory, but in this
This
particular
is
issue,
okay. This is gonna happen a lot as we do debate reviews, some more than others, and it's gonna be a massive thing here. The unfamiliarity with like debate theory, I guess, is gonna be a huge problem for like Vegan Gains is right. I don't think Dr. J has made any substantive argument. He has done nothing but make it impossible to make an argument. But unfortunately, Vegan Gains is in a position that I've seen a lot of people in. In fact, when I did competitive debate, I used to try to put people in just like for fun. I was more of a shit then. It's okay. Which is to put them in a position to be in this position where it is maximally difficult for you to articulate the problem with what's going on and the reason why what your opponent's saying isn't making any sense. and so it's really difficult. Like I'm seeing him like a little struggle a little. He might not even realize he's struggling, but what he needs to do is point out the like meta argument that Dr. J is making, so that he can get into the actual arguments of the topic at hand. It's very possible to do. I think I've stated clearly so far what you could even say to do that. Like you just point out what he's doing. Like you're making like you can even start with like, okay, I want to establish that it is okay to restrict human freedom sometimes, and then we can move on to whether it's appropriate here. And then if he tries to insist on doing both at once, you say that's literally impossible to make one argument that proves two things. So we're going to do it one at a time, and if you can't follow along, that's a you problem. But Vegan Gains, I don't imagine he has that history with debate. Like so far, he's having difficulty with it. Hopefully, he'll pull out of that. Some people, like we saw, some people have very good instincts for this, and I know Vegan Gains has been doing online debates for a bit, at least a few years. So maybe he'll find his way out. But like Dr. J is supposed to put him in this like really shitty position where you kind of need to know not just the topic you're at hand, but like how to deconstruct an argument and how to listen to an argument very, very well. That's something actually I'm hoping can be a positive that you, the audience, whoever's watching, gets out of my channel. Is I find very frequently that listening to an argument is a very, very difficult skill, one that no one is perfect at, myself included, but I seem to be a lot better at than a lot of people that I see try to do the same. And hopefully but it's just really hard to like teach outside of examples. So hopefully you're getting better and like seeing what I'm talking about. I've seen some people in previous debate reviews be like, "Oh, I never would have noticed that." Yeah, because most people wouldn't, because you're not trained to notice it. It's a skill, and it's a difficult skill to learn. Hopefully doing this makes us all better at it, myself included. But you can see like there are some difficulties. You have to like know how to listen to the argument, hear what they're actually saying. That's like a little bit past the words.
We're not debating whether it's moral to murder people. We're debating whether veganism is moral. And because we're debating veganism moral, you're trying to put that moral onto other people and saying they're immoral by not doing it.
Dr.
You're
J
the one that needs
is
to
very
be
much
able
like
to
winning
press
this debate,
upon
but he's
us
wrong.
why that is
very
the case.
wrong.
And you shouldn't have to use my moral theory in order to give your reasons for it.
For what it's worth, the like running away from your moral theory thing is extra cowardly in the sense that like one very effective tool in debate is to say, I will accept your moral theory and prove how even believing what you believe, you should agree that eating meat is wrong, which is possible, by the way, for certain moral theories. Maybe not divine command theory, maybe, but like it's very possible to do, and it's just another like cowardly like run away from that as a possibility. That's I think we've talked about like the three kinds of counter arguments. We haven't. Okay, I guess we haven't very much. This one, a turn, is where you turn your opponent's argument against them, and this is what it is the most effective tool. Like if you can say what you said proves my point, that is one of the best kinds of arguments you could ever make. And to say like I can accept your morals and prove to you with your moral system that you're wrong, that is what is being taken off of the table by Dr. J in like a very cowardly way.
Our theory is irrelevant to this particular debate. You're the one.
I don't think it's possible to do, so it's not super important. But like, yeah,
right,
he should
so, like if I were to
like needs to back up to principles, right? Like what Dr. J is arguing about is something he agrees with, and you can demonstrate that. By the way, I think it would be important to be like, Dr. J, let me demonstrate that you agree with the thing that you're pretending you don't, and like walk him to you agree with restricting freedoms. But you have to know that like that's the thing to do. So we'll see.
Tell you that I believe I'm the only person in existence that matters, so I should be able to murder whoever I want.
He's just going to reject this because that's your beliefs and not his. Like, it's fucking stupid.
There's no real way to argue against that sort of moral theory unless you try to test somebody's logical consistency or point point to say but maybe holes in somebody's.
So testing someone's logical consistency is something I would call defense. It's taking apart their position, right? It is to say like you have this logical, this ethical system. Let me provide challenges to it so I can demonstrate that it's non-functional. It dismantles their position. It doesn't build yours. And unfortunately, Vegan Gains, you're in a spot where you need to build your position. You need to establish like you can establish very quickly, but you can establish that it is okay to restrict human freedoms sometimes. A thing that Dr. J definitely agrees with, and it's shitty as fuck that he's making you go that far back as far as like what is okay to do. Um, but like you have to do that, then build up. He's basically what Dr. J has done is ignored the foundation that Vegan Gains laid in his opening, and then required that he lay additional foundations. Like, you know, if here's the ground floor and you have to build your building, he's saying, no, 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 no. We have to you have to build up from underneath the building. We both agree the ground is there, but you have to build it up, right? And he's basically setting it back to like before the first argument can be made. You have to start there, sadly.
He's logic.
But because you were made to start there, embarrass him for making you do it, because what he was doing was dishonest.
So you could say, well, I get my moral ideas from God. I could just say, okay, that's great. I don't. I want to murder
so great.
you.
Well, where
or
do you
steal
get
from-
them for? Because you're trying to make us do something.
No,
I'm not.
So
he's
like,
not.
I'm trying
He's
to
trying to
right,
encourage
so,
you to not do
So
a
I'm
thing.
trying to understand
He's not trying to
what
make
some
you
of
do
your
shit.
ethical values are, so I can actually test your moral framework and demonstrate to you that, in fact, with your own moral values, you should value the lives of animals.
So this is what I mean. He's trying to make the turn, which is really powerful if he can get it to work. Unfortunately, Dr. J's put him in a position where like you have to do a bunch of work to make that relevant before you can get here, and it sucks because you're right. But yeah, that's just where you are right now, Vegan Gains.
Yeah, I agree. That's what you're
So-
trying to do, and I think you have it backwards because you're the one trying to make
we're
everyone
gonna
do
spend this
something.
whole
I'm
Okay,
debate
not.
do you believe,
So
do
my
you
talking
believe
about what
logical
we should- what
consistency is
arguments we're gonna be
important?
making.
Of course, but it's logically consistent that you're the one that needs to demonstrate your moral theory is correct and that it
And
fits
no,
the
he doesn't,
veganism.
by the
I'm
way.
even willing to accept
So
your
by the way, that what Dr. J just said there, I don't know if he, I was gonna say it's a lie. He might believe it. So, but like, no, if Vegan Gains says fine, we'll take your moral framework, he doesn't have to prove shit. He's just saying like, no, you already agree with this moral framework, so I don't have to prove one because you're in agreement, unless you're gonna tell me you don't agree with your own moral framework, which is obvious nonsense. So now that we're agreed on a moral framework, let me demonstrate how this moral framework leads us to the same conclusion. It's actually pretty smart, and it's another way of getting around the problem. I think it's less effective, but it is a good way of getting around the problem. So props to Vegan Gains.
moral theory. I'm not even going to argue on whether utilitarianism or Kantianism or whatever's right. I'm willing to accept it, and then we can decide whether it's correct or not. But if you're going to try to say my moral theory is going to somehow prove your moral theory, we've got this backwards.
I'm not saying your moral theory proves my moral theory. What I'm saying is
Okay, so
your
why do you
moral.
keep asking me about my
So
Dr.
moral
what I'm
stop
theory?
saying
interrupting.
what I'm saying is, based on your own beliefs, either you have to accept the idea that animals have value and should have the same rights as human beings, or you believe humans should have fewer rights than they do already. So I
Even
just
if
want to
you prove
understand
that
your-
that's true,
And for what it's worth, Dr. J has explicitly, this is now Vegan Gains is ignoring a little bit of what Dr. J has already said. He has explicitly said there's no reason to think that humans and animals are entitled to the same considerations. Now, I understand that you have your challenge to that, but he's also not engaging with you on that. So like, no, like he has a reason. It's just shitty, and to argue with it, you have to do all this pre-work that he's making you do, which is why like you can't just jump into the actual argumentation. As much as that sucks, and that's what we're actually here for, you can't jump. You have to deal with the pre-arguments before you get to the arguments. Unfortunately, Vegan Gains.
even if you prove that's true, which I don't necessarily think you can, but even if you did, it wouldn't demonstrate that you have sound moral reasoning, and you seem to be unwilling to give me your sound moral reasoning. You want to prove
Well,
your
he keeps
point
trying to make
by
arguments,
asking
but
me
you're like fighting
questions
him.
about my
Like,
moral
well, you're
theory,
not making
which
the
is
argument. Like,
backwards.
Sorry,
Even if you make me
if you
look
don't
like a
wait,
complete fool,
you're making a claim. You're making a claim that I don't have sound moral reasoning.
I'm
Could
saying
you
you
point
need
out a
to-
contradiction in my beliefs?
well,
you
what
need
he's
to
saying
demonstrate-
is no.
Wait,
he
you just
can't,
said
but
I
what
don't
he's
have
saying
sound
is
moral reasoning. Can
dumber
you
than
point
that.
out a contradiction in my beliefs?
Well, Dr. J froze, so he's gonna
Well,
have some difficulty in doing
Yeah,
that for the
certainly
moment.
did not ad hominem you intentionally. So what I would like to know is, you think that
This time it's my YouTube.
Animals and humans should, and I'm just clarifying. I'm not accusing with these questions. I'm clarifying. So just want to know the answer. Do you think that animals and humans have the exact same human rights, or whatever, or the same exact same rights, or are there tiers, or explain how that works?
This is
So I
actually
believe
fine, but
humans.
this is a good question if Dr. J were engaging in good faith, but he already hasn't been, and we know that he can reject anything Vegan Gain says by saying, "Well, you haven't demonstrated that it's okay to restrict human freedoms." But if you're actually engaging in the argument, it's a reasonable question. Like, what exactly do you mean by these rights? Which is the question I also would want to ask Vegan Gains and interrogate like if that's reasonable or not.
And animals should have the same rights. And the idea
And what
is, I
rights
believe in
those
human
are is
rights.
kind of important.
The current human rights code we have right now
Okay, so now we
is
have
quite
a basis for
robust,
what he's talking
and
about.
for the most part, I agree with it.
Okay, so he's talking about human rights code. I assume this is like a UN thing, but so we'll see if there's. Okay, I see it from Canada. Okay, this is a Canadian thing. I don't know if Vegan Gains is Canadian, so maybe that's what he's talking about. But like, okay, protected grounds are okay for more. Okay, but what are like the actual lists of human rights? Okay, I can't really find it. Maybe he'll lay it out. And this is if it's also a
So,
Canadian thing, then like
I
okay, that's very
see,
specific.
I see granting rights to animals as a logical extension of
Okay.
human rights.
I would just
So I don't.
in a debate it would just be on me to clarify. I'm not familiar with that human rights code. Could you tell me what that entails? And clarifying questions are really important. Part of the problem of internet debate that I have is that because it's so antagonistic and because because there's an incentive to speak as much as possible at any moment where you're given the opportunity to speak, clarifying questions become near on impossible. But I would want to follow that up with, okay, he said the human rights code is his basis for that. Okay, I'm not familiar. Could you tell me what that code entails? And that's not necessarily a challenge, right? I'm not saying that it's wrong. I just need to know so that I can appraise it. And maybe I would agree completely. Maybe I would disagree in parts. We'll have to find out. This makes for productive debate, but in this context, it becomes incredibly difficult to do that. So another reason why online debates are frequently unproductive.
See a meaningful difference between humans and animals where it would justify taking away rights from animals and still granting rights to humans.
Right.
So
every
can
right.
you point out? So you said I don't have sound reasoning. Can you point out a?
Oh, and by the way, like one right that one right that I think is reasonable for it to be considered a human right is the right to medical care, but I don't think that's reasonable to provide to animals, mostly because animals, the majority of them anyway, do not participate in society in the same way. They're not able to like seek that out on their own. That has to be done for them, and so it requires a massive amount of work to provide this medical care to animals who like one don't ever like know they want it. Obviously it prolongs lives, so like that's good and whatever, but like it puts a massive burden on humanity. Like maybe we get to the point where that burden and those resources are not really like we don't have the issue of scarcity and this can be provided, but at the very least at the moment I require no difference between humans and animals. Maybe the trait is like their participation in society or whatever, in order to say I think humans should have this right, and I don't think it's necessarily appropriate to guarantee that right for animals.
Contradiction.
This is why the issue of rights is more of a problem
I
than
just
like
said we needed to find out whether your reasoning sound or not. So I didn't say you did not have that. So you think that humans and animals have the exact same?
He's saying they should.
Rights.
Well, no, not currently. That's why I'm an activist
you think
and I'm fighting for their rights.
Yeah, I'm with you. You think they should have the exact same rights?
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Clarifying question. Actually,
so
reasonable.
In a situation where, like the people in Alaska, where they are like the Inuits or people in northern Alaska or maybe Greenland or Canada, or where they might live, cannot live on a plant-based diet because it's snowy there.
This implies can. This is relevant.
Live on fish or whales or seals
and if
or whatnot.
Dr. J was willing to get into actual argumentation,
they are morally
why did he do what
deficient.
he's been doing?
Is that what you're arguing?
Yeah, so most of their food is actually imported. You can be vegan in Alaska. I've known
But
people who are.
but let's say they couldn't be, because it
Yeah,
doesn't
then they'd have
matter.
to move. Right, then they'd
They'd
have
have
to
to
move.
move.
Okay, see, like, I, I, no, I disagree with this pretty harshly. That's not always feasible for people, especially people living in environments where especially if you're saying like everyone needs to move from there. Like now this place will be uninhabited, which means it's not like they can sell their house. No one will be moving there. So it's just like just leave all your shit and get out of there. That's not really viable and also a pretty harsh requirement. Additionally, some number of people are unable to eat vegan meals because of like living in a food desert. If they could move from there, they probably would. But even if they couldn't, like they insistent that you can't live in your home because the society in which you were born into cannot avoid get it, like will not provide you food that uh well like enough food generally, but also like provide you food that is made without suffering is again putting like a weird onus on the individual for the circumstance they were born into. Um, no, it should be a systemic thing, right? No, people are not required to move and just like lose that. Like again, who's gonna buy their home if everyone should be moving from there? Some of these people also sometimes people living in food deserts are also living in food deserts because like there just aren't a lot of people there because they're farmers or whatever. Like you can't, like now it's like who's gonna live on the farm that's away from everybody who can't get there's a lot of massive problems that come with the insistence that everyone who's living in a place where they cannot eat vegan has to move. Like that also means like cities have massive population increases that they can't support, and now the vegan food is also way more expensive for more demand. Like there are huge massive problems with that. Yeah, there's just no world where I can agree with that, I think.
So you would argue
Yeah,
that
that's
in
that's
all
an
of human
insane
history,
argument.
people have been immoral until very recently.
Yes, certainly.
And in a situation,
I would disagree. Again, ought implies can. They could not survive otherwise. Uh, in fact, a lot of them didn't even really like didn't have proper nutrition, but like meat was for the vast majority of human history necessary to survive. So no, they were not being immoral. But now that we know more about it, and now we know uh, how to uh, supplement our diets and like change what we eat. Like now we know how to get alternatives and get the same nutrition without needing meat. Now we have more of an obligation and an obligation societally to make it more and more feasible to do this.
in which um, you build a house, and so you destroy animal habitat, and maybe you kill some living things doing it. Was that immoral or not?
Kind of depends. So, when it comes to building a house, you may be displacing wildlife, but you're not necessarily killing them. If you actually look at,
Yeah, but
say,
like like displacing wildlife, if we're putting it in terms of like human rights, it's basically you could like if you were to put up a bunch of houses in a forest, you could call that an ethnic cleansing of wildlife or whatever. I think that'd be stupid, but you could say something like that. Um, but like you are displacing people. Like if you were displacing a human from their home so you could live there, you would understand. Like we all agree that's pretty shitty. Why is it okay with wildlife? Like it's just inconsistent.
like logging, tree cutting, animals just leave. Very rarely are they ever killed.
Wait, are you okay with
And you're just reducing
logging
their
as an
territorial
industry?
range.
Mm-hmm.
That may cause a reduction in actual biodiversity or the amount of animals within a given species.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. That also
What?
means there's less predators, and that means there's less animals that can be actually killed and murdered. So,
Mm-hmm.
Wait, do you think predators are like innately immoral species? What the fuck? And also, like, how is he like super cool with logging and shit? Like, do you think that like climate change caused by deforestation and carbon emissions and millions of other things or whatever, like that's gonna in theory kill all animal life on Earth eventually? Like, you think that's cool? Like it just comes with no suffering? I think there is a moral issue of climate change because of the death it's going to cause. Like, it's weird that Vegan Gains doesn't. It's only like in the immediate. Does this action immediately kill an animal? And that's like his yes/no checkbox for whether it's moral. That's insane to me. Like maybe I'm being uncharitable, but I think only minorly so. The things that he actually said are still absolutely batshit. It gives me it makes me very confused of what his moral system is.
It's a bit of a it's a little nuanced, but I don't see an issue with, say, building a home necessarily anyway.
I see, but if you lived in a tree and I came and destroyed that tree and said just move 10 trees over, would that be a violation of your rights?
Yes.
No, not
Dr. J
necessarily.
is right. No, yes,
So
it
again,
absolutely is.
Really?
What the fuck?
we have homeless people who
Vegan Gains, you have to understand this. If he's using Dr. J said a tree, which like implies like more animal, but like Vegan Gains, if someone came to your house, you where you live, and they said you need to get the fuck out because I live here now, you would understand that as a violation of your rights. Like that's not just oh that's a really bad thing they've done. Like they've violated your right to shelter, like in a place to live. And yeah, but like I guess he kind of has to say that too because he wants people to just fucking move from places where they can't where they don't have access to like what they would need to be a vegan. And so like I don't know, it's effectively asking them to do that to themselves. It's not that someone else is going to live here now. It's just leave your home, find somewhere else to live where you can do this. That's actually insane. Like I don't know how this keeps happening. We're like I agree in large part with the vegan position, and yet the representative espouses something so insane that I can't agree with them.
may set up a tent, I don't know, in front of a store. Moving a tent or moving from one tree to another tree is much different than, say, me asking somebody with an established home who has a job in a certain area that has many items of ownership,
No, it's
a
really
family,
not that different, man.
to up and leave and find a new home. That's
So,
a lot more. So we're talking about like a claim to ownership.
It's a little different. But
Animals
like, it's
have
not that
much less of a
different.
claim of ownership of a tree than, say, a human would. When we have like these complex systems of ownership,
That's so wild. Of like, they don't have a concept of ownership, so you can do whatever the fuck to them. Like, by the way, this is the kind of thing that like just made colonizers feel justified in uprooting Native Americans and Canadians of just like, well, they don't think that they can own the land, so this is ours now. Fuck you. But like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I also don't think uh, that animals have a complete right to the like protection of their habitat, but they have some right to it. And it's weird that Vegan Gains is like, nah, not really.
and much more complex systems of just living, where we have jobs, we have a society.
I see. So if it's really inconvenient for us, then it's not okay. But if it's not too inconvenient for the animals, we can destroy their home.
That's not what I said, and
Well,
It's
that's
kind of what
clearly
he
not
said.
what's going on.
He
The-
said it
the-
like Dr.
the
J
animal that-
repeated it like really uncharitably and more uncharitably than I think is reasonable, but like that's basically what you said, man.
Lives in a tree that we cut the tree down and they have to move. You're saying it's just not that big a deal for them to have to move. That we would never accept that situation for a human to say it's not that big a deal that you have to move. It's not that hard.
Yeah,
The
so
effort
we
in which
do.
someone
We
would have to
actually
move
do
would-
that. Yeah, so we do that. Homeless people who set up tents in
Yep,
certain
and
They're
areas.
not.
that's-
These people aren't
they're
Bad.
told
These
to move.
What?
animals. These animals aren't homeless. They're not on other people's.
So what
they
he
are.
was saying was like, yeah, homeless people often like will set up and then police will shunt them along to move somewhere else, and that's fucking awful. It's actually one of the more disgusting things that people who fight for the protection of homeless people will complain about, because yeah, like it's bad enough that they're in the position they're in to be shunted around and like maybe they lose all their stuff because like someone came by and didn't like that they were doing it is pretty shitty. So like okay, I guess vegan Gains approved.
Land. They've been living
Alright.
there forever. If they were humans, they would have land rights. So the animals that are on the lands that have been there for hundreds of years, every court in the country would agree that if they had human rights, those would be theirs. They'd have squatters.
By the way,
right?
Dr. J, completely right here. This is why the topic of like framing it in the on the basis of rights is such nonsense. It's very easy to find rights that humans have that animals don't, and it's kind of reasonable. But if you talk about it in terms of, well, they probably shouldn't be killed and eaten and tortured, that's much more defensible. It's a much stronger position.
if nothing else. And if those people were humans, they would not be allowed to have their houses ripped from them and their land taken from them.
Yeah, so they don't have a home.
The
They
tree is their
may live
home.
in a tree, but they don't have a home. Again,
How are you dying
I'm
on
not
this hill,
really
Matt?
interested in talking about like what constitutes ownership or what
That's
constitutes
crazy.
I'm
to
talking
me.
natural
about the rights
home.
of animals. I mean, you're just ripping
But,
these homes out of
um,
these animals. I mean, how that is not right.
Yeah, but what I'm interested in is whether or not you actually value the rights of human beings. And from the sound of it, you seem to be concerned with, say, ripping away a home from an animal. So how do
Well,
you
he's
justify?
doing vegan gains. He just did to you what you were attempting to do to him, which is demonstrate the inconsistency of the of your moral position. He I know he didn't say as much, but it was pretty clear from his tone that he doesn't necessarily believe anything he just said. The point is that he has posed challenges to your moral system and found gaping holes.
Killing an animal?
I take divine command theory, which is how I would justify it. But you're saying that animals and humans have the exact same rights, and it does not sound like you're super
So
consistent in that. And that's the trouble,
Well,
because you want
no, Dr. J, it's not that he's not consistent in that. It's that he's consistent to the point of causing way more harm than not protecting the rights as he sees them. Like he's like there are some rights he seems to think like I don't know animals don't really have, which I guess that is an inconsistency, but also like is willing to demand people leave their homes even if they're not really able to, so that they can go somewhere else where they can be vegan or whatever. Like yeah, it's which I would consider a consistency, but to a fault, you know.
to make all of us follow your morals. I don't. I'm not not in this case.
Now he's back to being dishonest again. It's like it sucks so much in these arguments of like in these debates of like, well, the vegan guy is batshit insane and arguing for horrendous shit, but the non-vegan, like by nature of his position, is in the wrong and is also a dishonest, disingenuous fuck. So like, it's just I don't know what to do in spots like this. I'm not like a centrist on this topic, but like the vegan somehow is frequently making just the worst arguments.
So therefore, you have kind of the onus is on
I
you
don't
to
want to. I
demonstrate.
don't want to compare him too much to like Alex O'Connor. Alex O'Connor was like wrong in a lot of his argumentation, but he wasn't so insane that he was like, yeah, like that's like you can be being uprooted from your home isn't necessarily like or isn't necessarily a violation of your like it's like your animals' habitat isn't their home, and like yeah, it's cool to shunt homeless people across the city or whatever, which very much isn't. Like
That animals and humans have the same rights, and it does not sound to me like in the case of where people live, they do have the same rights. Do you only care if it's about life or death?
So you
it seems
just
like
said
he does.
you justify eating meat with divine command theory. So like God says it's okay to eat meat. That's basically why you think it's okay.
Now vegan gains
Yes,
is
and
like
even
running
if I were
from
wrong,
it,
it
trying
wouldn't
to
matter because I'm not
redirect to
pressing
somewhere
morals
else.
upon other people like you are.
But also like then Dr. J also retreats into the dishonesty of like I'm not trying to press my morals. Like neither is vegan gains, dude. Both of you are just saying what you think you should be right, you know? Like
And well, you certainly are.
I'm not.
You said you believe in the
I'm freedom.
Bible. Do you
Freedom.
not? So should I
citizens
have
are like, okay, vegan gains is right. He's not saying he's lying when he says that he's not trying to impose his morals on other people. Because at least in the way that he's using the word impose, but you haven't done the work to demonstrate that. Like that's what you need to be doing. Like you're following it up with getting into the trenches, but like no, you need to make clear like you're okay with restricting human freedom. Everybody is. We're just talking about when it's okay to restrict it. Now that we're on the same page, let's talk about when it's okay to restrict it.
freedom to kill you or kill your family or
Okay,
This
so
like
is
steal from you?
he's attempting to get to the
So you don't believe in
matter of it,
freedom.
but he's
So
talking about
you
like
believe freedom should be restricted.
freedom
You
is
believe in
freedom is the
restricted
default.
freedoms.
I've already said that. You're trying to restrict freedom in veganism, which is what we're debating tonight.
Well,
And
no,
so
he's
we're
not, right?
trying.
Because, like, by the way, you accepted his definition, which is that animals ought to have the same rights as humans. That there's a therefore that gets tacked on top of that, which is that therefore you probably shouldn't kill and eat them. But that, like, that's not an imposition on your freedoms. That is a conclusion you would come to once you agree with the moral position.
I'm trying to
Right.
discuss
So
the
you believe in restricting freedoms. You wouldn't be in favor of, say Hamas going over to Israel and, murdering innocent people.
When did this?
So
happen?
I think
2
that
days ago.
every
Oh,
moral
okay, that's
theory
why.
starts with maximum freedom and then restricts. I totally agree
Sure.
with that, and mine does that as well, and so does yours.
Well, it
And where
can't have been
your
2
and
days
I's
ago. It was a couple
differ
weeks ago.
is you want to
Or like a
restrict
week and a half
one
ago.
more thing than I do, and I'm trying to decide. We're trying to decide tonight if that one
Right.
extra
So like Dr. J has laid out the dishonesty that he's been espousing. We agree that things can be restricted and it's just about the specificity, but he's framing what Vegan Gains has to do as like demonstrate that it's okay to restrict human freedom. Like you just said that we agree except for this one instance. So why do you fight me on trying to demonstrate why this one instance can be appropriate by saying that no, it's never appropriate. Freedom is the default. We can never restrict human freedom.
restriction that you have that I don't have is legitimate.
Right. Okay. So it sounds to me that you've already stated that humans are unique to animals in the way that we're made in the image of God, correct?
Yes, that would be the divine command theory.
Oh my God,
deal
did he?
there. Yep.
Is he actually going to answer this
Okay.
and not run away to like
And that's
pretend like
why
it's not
you're
relevant, not
not okay with, say, turning human beings into hamburgers, but you're okay with turning cows into hamburgers.
So if you're trying to just sort of use like super emotionally charged language
Answer
to try to get
the
me to say
question.
something provocative, you can. But I think we all know what I mean by divine command theory, and that God says that humans are unique compared to animals. And
So, by the way, this is where I said he was lying about being ambivalent about which divine command he is using as the basis of his theory, because not all religions, first of all, not all religions have like divine commands in the same way, but also not all religions consider animals to be made separate and with distinction. Did I say animals? That humans are not made separate and with distinction from other animals. This is a very Judeo-Christian, like Abrahamic, I guess I should say, belief that is not ubiquitous. So again, like this is what I mean. Like, as much as he sometimes makes good arguments, he's just a dishonest shit constantly. Like he's lying to us repeatedly, and it's driving me insane that like he's making better arguments and calling out very clearly when Vegan Gains is is being is being kind of nuts, because he's also wrong and he's also lying. Like, um, so yeah, like obviously it does matter. And so while he pretends like this is a justification for anything, now it's reasonable to be like, well, you have to justify why that religion, why that divine command is appropriate to use here, even though you're pretending it isn't. Because don't if you don't assume that belief, then suddenly Vegan Gains is right that we don't have a reason to think that humans and animals are uniquely different. Your only defense from that was your own personal beliefs, which you also pretend don't matter.
I'm not sure why you need to go into it
Like
anymore. You're not
unraveling
really
this is such
bolstering your point on why we need to be vegans, because you could make me look as silly as you want. I could be
And now he's
be
like
made
getting
to
off
look
topic
like a
again. Just like
fool.
answer the question.
I could have picked a religion that no one believes
Like
in, and it is ridiculous. The
like
Dr.
have you
J
ever seen
religion,
someone
and you could
so
prove it
insistent
wrong,
on
but
not
it
engaging in
still
the
wouldn't
debate?
demonstrate that we should be vegans.
Right.
Like
Okay.
engage with the
So
argumentation. He's leading
again,
somewhere.
I'm
Let him
just
get
asking
there.
you. It's a yes or no question. So humans should have these sorts of rights. The right to, not be killed on the basis of being a unique divine creation from God or being made in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
You would agree to that?
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to say find out that black people were not made in the image of God, you'd be fine with killing them and turning them into hamburgers?
Okay, so this is Dr. J is likely going to reject this on how incendiary it is, but because there's more acceptance now that like the races are all human and like there's not really that divide there. This just feels like a very incendiary comment, but he's right. Um, a I would prefer a slightly different example, just because like the example that Vegan Gains used is basically giving Dr. J the opportunity to posture as like, you're just accusing me of being a racist because I'm a Christian or whatever. But like this has come up with even apologists before. I think William Lane Craig is the guy who said this, but like there are in the Old Testament instances where the where God would say like, hey, all these people, you should kill all of them, like all of them. Well, maybe not all of them. You should leave the young girls alive for yourselves. Wink. And like William Lane Craig and a Christian apologist was like, yeah, that is a divine command. We need, if there were any more Amalekites, I think was the specific example around, then it would be my obligation to kill all of them. Because yeah, divine command theory is the least consistent of any theory. There are instances where, like, according to your books, you are commanded to do immeasurable harm, and like do genocides and shit. So like, yeah, Dr. J, if you hold to divine command theory, you're on board with genocide and all sorts of evil shit. It's a really bad paradigm. But he's gonna, one, be like, why are you trying to call me a racist right now just because I'm a Christian or whatever? And then two, be like, this is off topic. My personal beliefs don't really matter. And in this regard, it kind of doesn't. But I do understand also, like, well, if this guy's on board for any sort of harm as long as his God says so, why are we looking to him for what's right and wrong? The problem is that the framing is currently like, you have to support your position. And while I agree that Vegan Gains did that, that's not the conversation has not led to that being fully established.
So it seems to me like you're once again trying to make me look silly.
There it
and
is.
what your trouble is, trying to make me look silly isn't going to help you much.
There it is.
I'll make an even sillier one. I have the Dr. J religion. And the only thing that in my Dr. J religion is true is that veganism is wrong. And you can ask me 100 questions about my Dr. J religion. I'm going to look foolish. But it still doesn't mean the rest of us should be vegans, because you're trying to get us to restrict human freedom.
That's exactly what I was talking about. But like,
Well, what if I told you I follow the vegan religion and God told me that veganism was...
I get what you're doing, Vegan Gains, but like, there's so much work that you have to do before. Okay, I gotta stop saying
this
it.
doesn't really get us anywhere in the conversation.
You totally could do that. You totally could do that. And the people.
So this doesn't really get us anywhere in the conversation. I'm trying to argue against your own moral beliefs,
which is not where you need to be. Right.
I'd rather you just stick to your own moral principles rather than fabricate and invent some.
We've seen this before. We saw Sanvi reasoning do the same thing of like the hiding behind the mere negation position. The problem is the mere negation position is a lot more reasonable here, because the question is veganism morally required? Mere negation is pretty reasonable. The problem is, like, vegans take the mere negation position as not appropriate because, like, you're saying we should eat meat or whatever. They're right in general, but you have to lay that out. You can't just assume that's the case. And so this does just look completely off topic, and like we're not really where we need to be.
I am not the one trying to change people's morals, and I think you probably agree that we start with freedom, and then we restrict from there. And because I'm not trying to restrict, it's not me.
So so that's a lie, right? Dr. J already said we are in agreement about restrictions that exist. There is one restriction we disagree with. It's not that he is opposed to restrictions. He is opposed exclusively to this restriction, which, by the way, it's not a restriction. It's a moral argument, right? If you think it's wrong, then maybe you shouldn't do it. But it doesn't. That doesn't necessarily, like, Vegan Gains again is not emperor of the world. He's not making it illegal. He's not shooting people for eating meat. That's not what's happening. But you're also on board for restrictions generally. It's just this one. So why you fight us when we try? Like, he's fighting on principle when he agrees with the principle, and the thing he disagrees with is the specific. But he's using the principle argument to avoid talking about the specificity.
It needs to tell everybody, why do you have to do what I say? Because if whether you do what I say,
by the way, he hasn't said that once.
Doesn't matter. Your behavior is not going to change.
He said
You're
it's morally
trying to say everybody's a bad person. I'm not.
Nope.
You're trying not everyone. You're trying to say
all the we should be logically
also, saying someone's a bad person is not a restriction. Like, this is some baby shit. Like, people do this a lot. We haven't encountered it very much on the channel, but like that's some bitch baby shit. Like, oh, you said I was a bad person. That means you're trying to restrict my freedoms. Nah, dude. Like, what if you are a bad person? By the way, he's not even saying that. I didn't even say that. I said like it is doing something worse than if you did. Like it's you're doing a bad thing. You're causing harm in the world. And if you have a problem with that, that's on you. But it's not about you. It's about it's about what's moral.
You're bad
Consistent.
persons. Yes.
Okay, so if you believe the reason humans shouldn't be turned into hamburgers is because we are made in the image of God.
Oh, and by the way, like he's changing subject again because he can't find like he's trying to like probe for weaknesses, but he's not doing it well, and he like it looks like he's just going back and forth between the two arguments. But like you could even be like you could make it clear how stupid what Dr. J has been saying is. You can be like, oh, well, you want to restrict my freedom to make humans into hamburgers, and you want me to feel like I'm a bad person for doing it. Isn't that terrible? And understand how fucking stupid that position is. Like, no, obviously we agree that restrictions can be reasonable. The only one on which you disagree is the veganism one, but you refuse to talk about it.
And we discovered that certain humans, say black people, were not made in the image of God. Would that not
And
mean
this, by the way, was an
that
actual
you
argument
would
used
then
by
believe
people.
it's okay to turn black people into hamburgers?
It could be, but I'm also just might decide that that particular religion's incorrect and switch.
So this is what I mean about he was lying about which divine command theory is like, like. Also, Christians historically are more likely to just to buy into the bullshit, terrible thing that the religion believes, as opposed to being like, well, I guess that means Christianity is not for me, and move to something else. That's just most religious
well,
people. I
we're
shouldn't just say
talking about
Christians.
the religion you have now. So
You're
based on the
talking
religion you
about
have
my
now,
moral theory.
Here
which,
we go
once
again.
Why are you trying to prove
Are we,
your case
I'm
with my
worried
morals?
that we're not going to get anywhere in this conversation. If this keeps up for more,
I
we're
Well,
just
why
gonna-
do you
don't
we're
think
just gonna
see
that's
go.
any
effective?
better way of
'Cause we're not getting
convincing somebody
anywhere.
that their own moral principles are either wrong or need to be changed than by pointing out a contradiction.
I see. But you're trying to make people do things, which is why I think seems to make sense the way you normally
Also,
debate
no,
is
he's
when
not.
you try to assert something, the
He's
other
trying
person sees
to
what's moral
convince
consistent.
people that they ought
And then
to
therefore
do
you're going to
certain things.
demonstrate you're perfectly moral consistent. And then I'm going to go, well, shoot, I couldn't shoot anything down. You're thinking.
Like to make clear how stupid what he's saying is like if I made an argument that like it's good to like volunteer at a soup kitchen, and I was saying like, and I made the argument that like, you know, even if I said it was morally required, which I don't think, but like let's say I didn't do that. Let's just say like it was good and I convinced people, and because I convinced people they went and did it, that wouldn't be like imposing on them and demanding that they do something. I would simply be convincing them that it's a good thing to do and they choose to do it. And like spreading ideas and convincing people of arguments is just not authoritarian in the way that he's pretending.
That you're pushing on everybody's right, and I'm wrong, and there
Like
we
it is
go.
the exact opposite of
So
of
again,
imposition.
based on your own moral principles, would
like if Vegan Gains was really trying to force people to do something, the last place would be here in a debate, because this isn't forcing anyone. It's trying to convince them to do it on their own. If he was going to force people, he'd be like trying to like get elected office or something, or pass legislation to make illegal the eating of meat or whatever. That would be closer to forcing people. But what he's doing here is trying to convince people of the wrongness of their actions, and hopefully they'll stop doing it. That's the opposite of force.
not mean if black people were not made in the image of God, you'd be okay with turning them into hamburgers?
Well, he gave himself an out to that, but
I think I would change religions.
he thinks that, but like
If
People don't
you
really
found out
behave
that
that way.
black people were not made in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Okay,
believe
so
you, but also
what
sure.
religion would you change to?
It doesn't matter.
What does
We're
it matter?
So off topic.
Well, I'm just curious because it sounds like you have
You're not
motivated
just
reasoning.
you're
Whoa,
not
whoa,
just
wait. It sounds like you have motivated reasoning. You said that you're getting your commands from God. Well, if the commands that you're getting from God don't align with your moral principles, you're saying you're changing your religion. So it sounds like you have completely motivated reasoning, and your reasoning isn't based
That's
on
actually
a
a pretty
commandment
good
from
point.
God.
Of like, if you would be motivated to change religion, then your morality comes from somewhere else, right? If a tenet of your religion can convince you that that religion is wrong morally and therefore you should believe in something else, you have a set of morals that do not derive from the religion and rather are being applied to it. That's a good point. That's actually a really smart argument.
God, it seems like it's based on your own personal set of preferences, and you change what God you believe in or what religion you follow based on those preferences. So
Yeah,
when
and
you
it's like,
say,
and there's a reason you didn't change your beliefs, like you didn't change your religion to one where the rights of animals are protected. So you clearly have a belief in that regard that has nothing to do with your religion, as we just established. So that's a good point. That actually is a really good argument.
I believe in divine command theory, I think you're completely
Mhm.
full of shit.
Yeah, you're right. If I switch religions based on morals, you're correct that I would not actually believe in
Well, do you know what motivated
But
theory.
and
reasoning
you,
is?
so like, notice how he put it as like, yeah, if I did that, that would be true. But you just admitted that that's what you would do if your religion said like it like came to this conclusion you didn't like. So you already are saying like, yeah, on board for that. And if I did do that, that would be the case. But like, you just did it.
Would not disagree. Yeah, totally. I would agree that if I switch religions every time I didn't like what my religion said, that
Okay,
would be
but
motivated
now you're
reasoning and
contradicting
whatnot.
yourself.
But
You know?
I'm really trying to get you off of trying to use my morals to prove your case, which seems I don't see why you don't see that's a problem,
Okay, can
right?
you
And like, for what it's worth, he at this point he's kind of right. Like, Vegan Gains has not put much effort into demonstrating the correctness of his position. Now, he did in his opening, but he should come back to that of like, here's what my reasoning is for this. Now that he has gotten that concession from Dr. J of like, okay, like you should concretize it a little bit of like, you don't, and not in a way where Dr. J should respond, not a question. You should say something like, okay, well, you just said that if you found out black people weren't created by God, or like made in the image of God, and then you would probably change religion. So you already agree that, so you are already in a position where your religion isn't affecting your morals. Now that we know you can't defer to that, like reconcretize your affirmative position, like make the offense, because while you established at the outset, it's been ignored and undiscussed up to this point. So to everyone watching, it, like, if you don't remember that was there, it's like it wasn't there at all. Nobody remembers that. Maybe just me, and even for me, you haven't derived impacts from it. You haven't like made it important in this debate yet. So do that.
Can you show me a better way of convincing somebody against their moral position than by pointing out a contradiction?
But Vegan
I,
Gains, this isn't
I
about
am not
Dr.
trying
J.
to
It's
get
about the
anybody to
argument.
do
And
anything.
like,
You
even
are.
if you convinced Dr. J, you wouldn't have made your point. Dr. J can be convinced of things that are wrong. We know that because he's a divine command theorist. It's not about whether you can demonstrate that he's wrong. It's about demonstrating the correctness of your position. It's too much defense. You need to establish your affirmative position, meet your burden of proof. I know
Right.
you can do
And
it.
could you
I'm
show me
not
a
trying
better way
to
of
force
trying to
anybody.
convince somebody away
The
from their moral position than by pointing out a
Yes,
contradiction?
absolutely. The way you should be convincing me that your moral position is correct is saying these are my morals, which I'm going to let you have utilitarianism, any of those that you want. You lay it down, you demonstrate why it's ironclad and that why it's absolutely correct and that there's no contradictions and that I should change my mind and switch to yours.
You
I'm not
can
By
trying
the
to
way,
complete
he's right because what he's describing is making an affirmative case.
a
I'm not trying
variety.
to convince you in divine command theory here tonight. You're trying to convince me of
That's only half
whatever
true,
it is
but
that you know.
Well, you
like,
just
yes,
change
make an
religions,
affirmative.
so it wouldn't really matter, right?
Okay, perfect. Like, that was the thing that he needed to do, and I think he needs to be a little more clear about it. But like, that is something that needed to happen. Of like, no. Like, you've already said that you would change religions if like we're past that. You're not a divine command theorist. You don't believe in shit, which is fine. Like, now you've like, that is important because like you've basically removed the counter argument, but you have to make your argument for the counter argument to be relevant that you've now removed.
I won't change religions anymore necessarily because you're totally right that I can't change religions based on the fact that the morals change. You agree? I was just trying to get you to realize that I'm not trying to convince
If,
people of
by the way,
things
like
when
you
you
can
are,
imagine an
and
alternate
therefore you
world where
can.
Vegan Gains has made his affirmative argument, and now we're arguing about like, well, divine command theory says like, like that doesn't hold or whatever, and now you can take apart Dr. J's position of like he clearly has no consistency and doesn't believe in anything. So, like my affirmative position, like is here. The counter argument is coming from a complete mess of a moral position with no without adequate foundation. Why do we need to like we it's effectively unargued against. It's not exactly, it doesn't exactly line up. There's a little bit of a problem, which is why I was hesitating there. But like it becomes at the very least much stronger a position to demonstrate that your opponent doesn't have any sound, like there's no consistency in their position, so their counter argument is as likely to exist as not, just because it just for the purpose of, well, I don't want to do it, so here's my argument. It's not rooted in any good reason.
You can demonstrate logical contradiction in my theory all day long, and it won't matter.
And by the way, it does matter to some extent, because like if Vegan Gains had made his affirmative position, which again he did in the opening, but like if he had reestablished it in the back and forth here, because we're decent way in, and like people will forget, and especially with another opening in between and all this stuff. Like if he had done that, then like Dr. J couldn't, like he would have a serious amount of difficulty deconstructing the position without referring in some way to his moral code. Like he already did that at the end of his opening, where he's like, well, humans were made by God, why would we be the same? Like he's going to defer to that at some point, and so now it becomes relevant, just that we're not there yet. And I guess like in some way we did a little bit talk about the affirmative case, and Dr. J demonstrated how unworkable, just absolutely unworkable Vegan Gains' position is.
Because I'm not trying to force morals upon people. You're trying to force a moral
Again,
So
upon
do you
people.
no, he's
believe?
not.
So do you
He's
believe
trying to argue for
that
the
we should
correctness of
be
his position.
logically consistent?
I can answer it again. Yes.
Okay, so then why would you say it wouldn't matter if you can point out a contradiction? You just said you
Because
wouldn't.
I
making an
can be
affirmative
wrong.
case.
My system can be logically inconsistent, and it still wouldn't prove because that your system's correct.
Well, it would.
Is that there could be 100?
And by the way, like a really good way to demonstrate this is we are not arguing we are not in a debate where I guess I'll back it up. Veganism and eating meat are not a true dichotomy, as much as they seem like it is. You can be vegetarian as part of it, but also like to make the argument that veganism is morally required, the opposite of the alternative position does not have to be it's okay to eat meat. Someone could argue that veganism is, instead of being obligatory, it's supererogatory. It's good if you do, but not a bad thing if you don't. Something like volunteering at a soup kitchen, as I mentioned before, would be something I'd consider supererogatory. It's good to do it, but you're not like a terrible person if you don't do that all the time. It's just like it's in that like commendable, as opposed to, well, you're just doing what you have to do. No, like you shouldn't commend a parent because they never beat their kid, but you should commend them for like supporting them and making sure they live happy lives or whatever. Like there's stuff they can do that's above and beyond. That should be commended, right? You could take that position with veganism, and putting it into those terms, you realize that like it doesn't matter if Dr. J, who thinks eating meat is okay, is proven wrong, because that wouldn't make veganism morally required. This is like the correctness of the mere negation position. But like I know Dr. J's hiding behind it to some extent, but he's also like partially correct in taking that position in the first place, and Vegan Gains isn't addressing that. Like he's only arguing as though this is just veganism versus meat eating, and that's not what the debate is.
Moral
Well, in this
systems
case, it
that are
would.
wrong, and it wouldn't prove that yours is right.
Well, in this case, it
But
would.
if there's 100 moral system and you prove 99 of them are wrong, or 98 of them are wrong, and the 99th one's right, but the 99th
Actual batshit that a divine command theorist is saying this, because this is often the thing people say about like the Bible and biblical morality of like, yeah, there are some things that are cool in there, like the don't murder part. I'm on board for that. But then there's a lot of stuff that is absolutely not it makes no sense to call this like a moral claim or like to orient your life around it. Things like, you know, wearing mixed fabrics being punishable by death is insane. Um, and so like you can't just like take the whole thing, but there are good stuff in it. You have to, and if you have to appraise everything one at a time, then what good is the book as a whole? And it's wild that Dr. J has to be the one to point out correctly that like, okay, even if I'm inconsistent and wrong about a bunch of stuff, that doesn't make me wrong about veganism being not morally required. You have to demonstrate your point.
Ninth one demonstrates that veganism is incorrect and it's okay to not
Though
be
of
a
course,
vegan.
like the foundation for
Then the
that like
fact that you
argument
showed
was
the
being
other
spoken about.
98 are wrong doesn't actually demonstrate that you picked between the 50-50 of the two that are left.
Dr. J
Yeah,
is
so if you
is such this weird mix of like understanding debate and also not like, or maybe he does understand he's being intentionally dishonest. I don't know, but like understanding debate in some regards, but not in others. Where he's like, yeah, he understands that his opponent needs to make an affirmative case and that he hasn't really done that sufficiently. He did it in his opening, but he should reestablish. And like understands that his position can be the mere negation and understands that like he can demonstrate an inconsistency from Vegan Gains, but inconsistencies on his own part aren't reasonable. But he doesn't seem to understand that like the fact that we're both that everyone here is in favor of restricting human freedom means that his argument about like Vegan Gains wanting to do that is not exceptional in the way that he's pretending it is. It's just so weird that like he's often correct and often understanding the situation very well, and yet will present these arguments that are completely flawed to the point of being, like I said, dishonest.
you value something like logical consistency, and I point out that based on your moral beliefs, you'd be okay with
I know I've
trying
been talking
black
so much
people
that
in
we've barely gotten
hamburgers.
to
But
it.
all
We're
you're
about half
doing
an
that
hour
for is
in.
to try to
We'll
create
keep going
a big
little longer if
moral,
we get anything
you're trying
new
to make me look like a
in the
jerk.
next 20 minutes, but we'll keep
You're
going.
not
But otherwise,
debating
we
in
might
good
be done
faith.
Yes,
soon.
that's kind of the point of, pointing out logical
Yes,
flaw
but we
in
all
somebody's
know
moral
that the
views.
divine command theory I have doesn't say that. So now you're going to add things to the divine command theory that I don't agree with in order to try to make me look foolish. So you're not arguing.
Except, so by the way, he's only partially right. Like he's right in like what Vegan Gains is trying to do is not appropriate. It is not helpful here. But also adding things to divine command theory isn't necessarily like Dr. J. There's no commandment against slavery, or against rape, and I'm guessing you're against those things. That's adding something to divine command theory. You're not opposed to that. But again, I understand where he's coming from. Of like, it's not super relevant.
in good faith.
Sorry, how am I not arguing in good faith?
Because you are adding things
Ironic
to
from
my
Dr. J, who's
divine
been
command
No, I'm
theory
not.
that
disingenuous
don't
now.
exist.
What did I add?
That aren't there. That you were saying that black people aren't humans.
No, he asked if.
That
He
this
said,
isn't
Well,
the
can you
that's a
engage with the topic?
hypothetical. That's not adding a
Right,
I seriously doubt that Vegan Gains thinks that black people weren't made in the image of God. I don't think that's an argument he would make unironically. It was a hypothetical, my dude.
creating a
That's not adding
hypothetical
a
that makes me look.
That's not adding a premise to divine command theory. That's
It
just
is.
And by the
testing
way,
your
it's
own
something
moral-
people argued for
you're-
literally
No,
for
that's
hundreds
testing
of
your own
years.
moral principles.
You're adding a command to the divine command
So it's not
theory
like
that's not there. But the reason you
invented by
chose the
Vegan
one that you
Gains
did was to try to be provocative to make me look dumb or look
So
mean.
let me ask you this:
Hey, it's the other part of the thing I said. You're just trying to make me look racist. It's in a different way. He's phrasing it differently, but it's exactly the thing I was saying, and exactly the problem with the inflammatory hypothetical.
animals made in the image of God? Like
No.
are dogs made in the image? So it's entirely possible that God could have created certain human beings that were not made in the image of him.
Also, by the way, you could just say, "How do you know that?" And then that's like a huge problem. He would say like, "Well, the Bible doesn't say as much." I was like, "Okay, cool." But the Bible doesn't say that like all humans were made. Like it's like it says like Adam was made in the image of God. What if no one else was? You know, like it's stupid. It's not defensible as a position, but again, it's not. It's also not. You haven't established what you need to make this relevant.
Correct.
Games.
Like it's
I
logically
feel like I'm on
possible.
repeat because
Like he's
it's the
created
same
other
thing over and
creatures
over.
that aren't made in the image of God.
By the way, a lot of arguments go down like this where there's a huge problem underneath what's actually being talked about, and people just don't realize that it's there, and so they talk past each other constantly, or like they try to have an argument that doesn't work until you until you solve the other problem. And I don't just mean like formal arguments or formal debates. I mean people talking to each other and disagreeing about stuff. Like I don't know if this is a perfect example of it, but it's one I can think of where I was definitely wrong. Where a friend of mine was saying like, oh, when your car gets towed and you have to like pay to get it taken out of the impound lot, he was calling it extortion. And I was saying, oh, no, like I agree with a lot of the arguments he was making, but I don't think I call it extortion. The thing is, what was underneath that and what was making it impossible for us to have a conversation and to see eye to eye was that I had a wrong definition of extortion. I thought it was a synonym for blackmail and not like, leveraging your power for gain or whatever what the actual definition is. And once I realized that, I was just using the word very, very differently and probably incorrectly, I was like, oh no, yeah, you were just right. And that was the only thing that we really needed to discuss, but we didn't realize that there was something underneath the conversation or something aside from what we were talking about that was getting in our way. And then I mean, I'm glad I figured that out and then went back and told him like, oh yeah, by the way, this is what was going on. I like 100% agree with you. I just had a misunderstanding of what the definition was. And so like, yeah, I was arguing as though you were saying something different than what you were saying. But in this case, it's more explicit, certainly. But like, it's just a matter of, well, as I was trying to get at, like a huge number of arguments have this exact problem of people are not realizing what the actual issue is.
So he's
Which,
created
by the
other
way, I only
creatures
think
that
Vegan Games
aren't made in his image, correct?
doesn't realize. I think Dr. J does.
Yes.
Or Dr. J has
So
a different
it would be
misunderstanding.
logically possible that there are certain human beings that aren't made in his image.
No.
What's
What?
the logical
Human
contradiction?
Equals image
What's
of
the
God.
logical
The
contradiction?
equal image of God. So if you there's no
And
that
now
could
we're
exist,
arguing about
but that
the
would be a
image of God,
different
which is
set of divine
just
divine
not
So
command theory that I agree with.
wait. Human equals made in the image of God.
Yes. So if you say someone's human,
so you
then
wouldn't
they're-
have your chromosomal. Sorry. So if God didn't exist, there would be no humans.
Yeah, he believes that, but it's also not relevant.
do you want to have a religious debate, or do you want to
Yeah, he
tell
even
everybody
explicitly
why they
was
need
like,
to
we
become a
shouldn't
vegan?
have a religious debate. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I'm trying to
Vegan
see
Games
if
is
there
just
actually
completely
is a
lost
logical
here.
contradiction here.
And this is what I mean. Like, he doesn't even. I don't think he realizes he's lost. You can tell by his demeanor. Like, he thinks actually that Dr. J is just stonewalling him, and he is. But like, Vegan Games doesn't realize that he's the one who is out, like, isn't arguing where he needs to, and like isn't doing what he's supposed to. It's not that his opponent is just being needlessly difficult. He is, but it's also that you're just like you're not making the arguments you need to make, and you're just completely lost in where you're supposed to be.
Because this is
You're trying to
Kind of
A
tear
good
down.
analogy for this, by the way, is if anyone's played any MOBAs like League of Legends. I know it's brain rot, whatever, but like this would be like someone who's trying to, like, there's an objective fight going on over here, and they're over here, and like wondering why the enemy they're fighting is like running from them, like, hey, why won't you fight? And it's like, because you're not supposed, because it's not your opponent just doesn't want to fight you or whatever. It's like, this isn't where you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be here, and you just like, and by not being there, like you're gonna have serious problems, even though what you're attempting to do isn't necessarily bad.
On my
for the debate.
religion instead of arguing for veganism, which kind of is making me feel like you don't have a
No.
lot of good arguments for veganism. All you have
no.
is
So
arguments for anti-non-veganism, which is
And
probably
Dr.
double
J's right
negative
there.
can you
and not
can you
correct.
define
true.
can you define what a human is for me? Like what
Oh
would,
my
how
God.
would you
Said
define
made
human?
in the image of God. Made in the image. Of
Okay,
God.
so it's not a good question, but the answer was worse, and makes it clear why, again, Dr. J, what you believe does actually matter for this debate. Because if that's your definition, we're gonna have a real hard time discussing like scientific facts or whatever, which are necessary for this. But I'm not exactly sure where Vegan Games is going with it, so we'll see why it's relevant.
Okay, so if you were wrong about God existing, humans wouldn't exist. Like there would be no species called Homo sapien.
Yeah, if
It
I'm
doesn't matter.
wrong about all that, I'm a fool. So tell me why I need to be a vegan again.
Well, I don't think you've actually demonstrated that my hypothetical is a
don't have to
logical contradiction.
Oh,
you
he's
do.
trying to go back to this
It's
shit?
like
Oh my
if
God.
I said, can you demonstrate to me why you should be able to breathe? Why?
That has
That's-
nothing to do
that's-
with what I asked.
Because
No, but like Dr. J
because
is
you
right.
are
You're
trying
just
to get
not
me
presenting
to
your affirmative.
say something.
And this is weird too, because oftentimes when people like pretend like you haven't made your affirmative case or um, talk or like just talk as though you had never established any of your premises. Normally, they don't go out of their way to give you opportunity to do that. They just say you haven't done it, even if you have. It's this weird instance of, again, this is what I mean of like it's weird. Dr. J like knows what's going on, but still makes dog shit arguments sometimes. But like Dr. J keeps giving him opportunities of like, hey, you want to lay out why what you think is true. Now he did this in the opening, and maybe you should be paying attention. But Vegan Gains also needs to be reminded of like, here's the reasoning I gave, and he could have been more clear about the reasoning. By the way, I think there were problems with what he laid out in his opening as well. But we're never going to talk about it because Dr. J is addressing only what's being discussed. Well, I guess both of them are really only really talking about what's happened in the back and forth, and Vegan Gains has basically refused at every turn and opportunity to establish why what he believe it, like establish his like or like meet his burden of proof, I guess is the way I want to put it.
Some human freedom. I have to prove a human freedom's okay. Yet in every other part of your moral code, you start with moral freedom as the basis, and then you restrict.
Wow,
but
it's
in
actually
this
funny that
particular
this is becoming relevant because he's
situation,
right.
you seem to
The fact that Vegan Gains is unwilling to make a positive case and instead only attacking the negative case, Dr. J ends up being right about his what he was saying about the order that we should approach with freedom. Like, I think both of us would like. I think everyone would agree with the paradigm like we should start with freedom and then restrict only when it makes sense to restrict. Even though not all ethical systems believe or go this way. By the way, divine command theory doesn't go this way. But now it becomes corrective like, well, this is the one thing where we're going to say that there should be a restriction because you shouldn't have the free, because you can't demonstrate the reason where you should be free. It's only attacking the opposite, where it should be saying, here's why we should impose it. He ends up being right.
Start with the
only
idea
because of how
that
Vegan Gains has been
veganism's
debating.
correct, and then go from there. And that's backwards. You start with freedom, and then you restrict, and you would do that in every other aspect of your life.
I do that too.
Maybe I'm wrong?
I
Okay.
do that exact same thing too. So I start with the idea
Okay.
of freedom, and then I consider that there are certain actions that somebody can commit that restricts other freedoms.
And for what it's worth, in his defense, Vegan Gains did try to like lay out that human rights are a basis by which it is reasonable to restrict human freedoms, and he has gotten Dr. J to say that, you know, that we're in agreement about every freedom except this one being that is restricted being restricted. So like he shouldn't have to lay out the foundation anymore, and like now he can actually make an argument. So hopefully he'll like start going, okay, well, like human rights are about foundation for this. I think they ought to be like animal rights ought to be the same as human rights. Therefore, right?
So in the interest of freedom, you may want to restrict certain freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically how we come up with the Human Rights Code. And from there, I determined that animals should also be, included.
This is the leap that, like, it's not much of a leap, and he can bridge it, but you need to. You can't just walk past that. You have to lay out, like, why that should be the case. Now, your argument is pretty good. The name the trait challenge. It's a good argument. But and it's certainly for certain protections it makes a lot of sense. Not for the totality, because what he was saying before is absolutely insane to me about like you should have the exact same rights, not just and like you should move to avoid like, oh my god. But like at the very least, not being killed and turned into hamburgers or whatever. That's really easy to establish with this name the trait challenge. You just don't let it go without saying that. He might say
Human
it
Rights
in a second.
Code. But,
Right.
Okay.
But
that's the one
again,
thing
the issue I see here is that if you're going to say humans are unique to animals because we're made in the image of God, and on that basis, it's okay to kill.
Well, see, that's the thing. You kind of skipped a step there, Vegan Gains. He didn't do that. You like presented that argument for him. He's like defended his position since then, but like he didn't make that argument. And this is the first in the back and forth that you're really like laying out. Here's like a good reason for restriction. You could do it a little bit better, but like, so now the fact that there are problems with his position aren't really that good because he hasn't actually argued against your affirmative case. Yet you've assumed his argument for him.
Kill and eat animals, but not humans. If you were to come across humans that were not made in the image of God, you would therefore logically have to be okay with killing and eating humans. Or you would have to admit that animals should also have human rights. You have
And by the way, if this is the approach you're going to take, now that you've like finally said something that you've said in the opening, you can even say like, how can we know that animals aren't made in the image of God? Because what that means is so nebulous. Like, you can mean any number of things. Like, how do we know? It doesn't explicitly say so in the Bible, but it also doesn't explicitly say otherwise.
those two options. And so far, you haven't shown that there's
I
a
think
contradiction with that hypothetical I proposed.
You created a false
Okay,
dichotomy.
maybe this is what was going on the whole time, where like Vegan Gains was simply like taking as established what he said in the opening, didn't realize that Dr. J was kind of acting like it wasn't said, and so it was like, well, I guess the only thing that you could possibly be saying to counter argue it is like your divine command position, which is kind of correct. That's the only thing Dr. J that even pretended to argue against veganism, as opposed to like the what I would call like overview type arguments where he was saying that, like, you have to defend the idea of restricting human freedom first, which is fucking nonsense. And so I guess that's probably why Vegan Gains was lost. He was like, but I did do this thing, so why, and he hasn't argued against it, so what choice do I have but to assume what his argument is and tear that apart? That makes a lot more sense for what he was doing. It's just not how it comes across.
I think
This is not
those
how
two
this
are not
debate
the only
has
options
felt
because you said
watching.
you didn't create a false dichotomy. You said there was a human that wasn't made in the image of God, which I think I already said is an impossibility in my system.
Well,
So,
he's saying that it's an impossibility now, but he definitely wasn't saying that earlier. This is another problem with divine command theory, is it's just like you make shit up, right? It's not actually a system. It's just he realized there was a problem, so he made shit up to solve that. Of like, oh no, it's impossible now. So I guess never mind. Don't worry about it.
you a few questions.
So
do you think that
wait,
using
wait,
any
wait, wait, wait. Why is that an impossibility? Do you think it's like it? How is that impossible to have a universe where God doesn't exist but humans also exist?
Just before we go too far, I've wanted to give a lot of autonomy to you guys. This is maybe going just a bit far into the philosophy of religion space. I have to draw the line somewhere. So
I think, by the way, this is a good place for James to draw the line. So far, they haven't really like delved into it that much. There was one other instance earlier where maybe they went a little bit further into like the religiosity discussion than this. But yeah, like it's a good time for him to step in. Moderators, they can be helpful for conversations as well. Just like, let's steer us back on track.
I do have to say it might be good for us to return, and I do think that there is something too, maybe even temporarily, if Dr. J, if you're at all interested in taking a shot at the name the trait.
Oh my
would you
God,
call
Well,
it?
James
he's already
remembers
named the
better than-
trait. The trait is being made in the image of God. This isn't really a religious debate. It's still about veganism.
Well, the problem is, you're right, Vegan Gains, but the problem is Dr. J only said, I guess he said it in his opening, but like he hasn't really defended that in the back and forth. Because of how these debates work, I often segment the openings from the back and forth because it's often treated like they don't exist. The openings, that is, and so like, especially since Dr. J hasn't like defended that as much, he hasn't applied it directly to the name a trait challenge, and in his opening he didn't say that was the name a trait thing. That was like, you could take that as like he would probably say it. Like, you should have made him say as much before like, you're right that he would, but he didn't.
It's just that that's the trait he named.
Right.
We're not really debating
Right.
religion.
Right.
Like that
Right.
just happens to be the trait.
Okay,
Right.
Okay, I got a better, the last 10 minutes or so, I got a much better idea of what Vegan Gains thinks is going on in this conversation, and his approach makes a lot more sense. But like, some of it was kind of jumping the gun, like make Dr. J say that that's the trait, like make it explicit, because you just looked like you were completely, like, where you were going made no sense whatsoever, even though now in retrospect I get it.
it seems almost inevitable that it turns into a debate on religion. I'm not trying to be difficult, so
It doesn't
I'll
have to,
defer to you
but-
guys
Well,
if you guys want to keep going
try.
in this direction.
I'm trying to not talk about religion at all.
I mean, you are and
but
you're
if he's
not.
going to continually ask me why I want to not restrict human freedom, and he's going to ask me
But you
religious
do-
questions, that's
okay.
it. But I'm trying to figure out why we're restricting human freedom, and that should be a completely non-religious
Well,
debate.
it's not a religious question. Like again, the trait you named is being made in the image of God. So
Right.
you haven't actually
Okay,
shown.
now that Dr. J has said right, has agreed to that, now we can proceed as though he had said it. It just maybe he wouldn't have like the issue I had was if this back and forth section started and Vegan Gain said, "Okay, I want you to name the trait," Dr. Dre might have said something else. Is what I mean. Like maybe he would have said intelligence is the difference. Um, if he at that point said that humans are made in the image of God, then everything else that follows made a lot more sense. But he didn't actually agree to that yet, and so it seemed a little weird. Okay, now that he has, now we can like hunt him down on
that
that,
the
right?
hypothetical I proposed is a logical contradiction. So, based on your moral view, if black people were not made in the image of God, you should be okay with killing and eating black people, just like how you kill and eat cows.
Right, but you can see how I
Now,
don't
it
like.
sounds like
And by the way, you should have finished that with, and you said if that were the case, you'd change religion. So like by your own admission, you don't actually stand by divine command, and you even said that if you were to change religion, then you wouldn't be holding to divine command. So your counter argument is bunk. But okay,
if
finally
you're
we're
not
getting
comfortable with
productive,
that idea.
and like now
So
we're
that's a
gonna actually counter
contradiction.
argument.
So either
No,
you have to agree
I'm not comfortable
agree
with
to
the
the idea of
soundbite.
taking away human rights, or you have to grant rights to animals.
I'm not comfortable with the soundbite. Right, that's what I'm not comfortable with.
I mean,
And
it's what you
this
said, my
is
dude.
this is what I'm not comfortable with in that example. Does that make sense?
So you're comfortable with killing and eating black people so long
Okay, not
as
the
they're not
yeah,
made in the
like,
image of God.
unfortunately, it is like it does sound like he's going for a clip, but the problem is Dr. J should admit mostly to this. You just have to I don't know, just phrase it differently, and he'll probably agree. But the fact that it comes off as like as incendiary and like and absurd in like a clippable soundbite type time period is going to make him like run away from the answer, even though he agrees. Yeah.
I don't care if it's not a comfortable soundbite. That's your belief.
So you think there's
And don't accuse him. Just like if it's more make like reestablishing and asking the question, then maybe it's better. Like, because you're right, Vegan Gains. You just need to get him to agree, but it's really hard when it sounds that awful.
there are humans that aren't really humans. You would be comfortable with killing them. That's what you're saying.
No.
Well, yes, it is.
I reject the idea that you're not human on the basis of not being made in the image of God. Like
But-
again, you
so
haven't
whatever it
shown
is
it
that
as an impossibility.
So whatever it is that humans have that you also give to animals, it's not logically impossible that there would be another person that didn't have whatever it is that you think they have, and you would be okay with killing them. That is the situation you're giving me. It's silly. It's silly. I
So-
wouldn't even give you that, and I wouldn't even
I don't
ask
really
you that
understand
question
what he's trying to
because
say,
it
but
would demonstrate that
seems-
I'm not arguing in good faith. I'm just trying to make you look bad and trying to get you to kill
Okay,
people.
I think I see what the issue is now.
Okay, so like I partially like the second part, like he's kind of right. Like it is more of like just making him look bad, but like it not actually proving his position. But like if the opposition that we've finally gotten to for Vegan Gain's position is that, well, the trait that humans have is that they're made in the image of God. We have to go here, right? And it is relevant, but I don't know.
You're arguing
It's become
about
relevant
a weird semantic issue. You're just changing the definition of what a human is, rather than just accepting we're talking about the same thing. You're just defining it differently. So is it logically
And by the way,
possible?
like another way you can approach this, because like Dr. J seems a little confused at the prospect, is just be like, oh no, I guess that doesn't work. I was gonna say like, say a child is born and you find out like, God tells you like a new passage appears in the Bible, that kid is not made in the image of God. Is it cool to kill and eat them? Like Dr. J would probably say no, even though everything lines up the same.
Possible that if God doesn't exist, we would still be here?
lots of things are logically possible. I would even say
So,
not
so
having
you
a God
acknowledge
is
it's logically possible. So you acknowledge it's logically possible if God did not exist, we'd still be here.
And the same way you'd probably say it's logically possible that it's okay to eat animals, though you don't think it is.
Well, no, he
Well,
wouldn't agree to
yeah,
that. What?
it is logically possible to have a moral framework
So
where
how
that's
does
okay.
how does this argue for veganism being correct?
Right.
Okay.
So if you
so
acknowledge,
now I would accuse Dr. J of simply pretending like the argument hasn't been made. Vegan Gains is said explicitly, human rights would prohibit these actions being taken to humans, the killing and eating of humans. Like on the basis of human rights, we feel it's inappropriate to do that. He has also said that there is no reason why animals shouldn't have the same rights, and if you think there is a reason, this is like I'm asking you to name the trait, except your trait doesn't work. So he has made an affirmative case, and like to pretend like his counter arguing against your counter argument is irrelevant is disingenuous and dishonest. Like now I am comfortable saying without question he's arguing in bad faith, which he wasn't doing for a little bit there, but he started in the outset. And we're back
that
to
it's
it.
logically possible for humans to exist without the existence of a God, then if your basis for granting humans rights and not being okay with killing and eating them is being made in the image of God, then therefore, if we found out that certain humans weren't made in the image of God or God didn't exist at all, would you be okay with killing and eating humans?
Repeat that one again.
If your
the second part of that I think is actually really interesting. So we'll hear it again, but Vegan Games was a good point. What if we just found out there wasn't a God, right? That divine command, there's no commander. There's that command. The command never came. If your only objection to killing and eating humans is that God said don't do it, which by the way, only kind of, then if you find out no, he didn't say that, are you cool with doing it? That lands home a little bit better to me than the like. What if there were some humans that weren't like this? Because Dr. J has also tried to define himself out of the problem by saying, well, it's impossible for there to be a human that wasn't made in the image of God. Even though like he'll agree to it being logically possible, he'll follow it up with being like, no, that can't be the case because the defining attribute of a human is being made in the image of God. He's just defining him. He just tried to define himself out of the problem, even though it still exists.
For not killing and eating people like you kill and eat cows is humans are made in the image of God. That makes them unique to animals, to where humans deserve rights, animals don't. Then, if, say, a God were to exist and he only made certain human beings in his image, or God just didn't exist at all, he made no humans in his image, then you'd be okay with killing and eating those
I don't know
those
what
humans,
Dr. J can
correct?
say other than
In the
yes.
same way that if we found out that white people weren't really humans, you would be okay with killing and eating them, yes.
Well, Vegan Gains wouldn't be, right? Vegan Gains is very clear. He's not okay with killing and eating any animal, human or otherwise. So no, he would not be on board, and it has nothing to do with whether it made by God. But maybe he means to say like that he would be on board for it because it's not a racism thing, or like if he, yeah, like at least the argument is not inherent, isn't necessarily a racist one in that he'd be like any individual. But now he's admitted, yes, he's okay with killing and eating humans as long as God didn't say it's okay,
So
Or
you
it's not
would
okay.
be okay with killing and eating, say, black people if they weren't made in the image of God?
Yeah, part of the problem is like, yeah, this is okay. It is what I thought of like he's worried about coming off as racist. He's if it were white, he just said if it were white people, he would also be okay with that too. It's not about like black people specifically, but yes, he is in agreement with the logical conclusion you're leading him to. It's just he doesn't want to come off as both insane and a racist, just insane. And I think that's kind of reasonable. Oh no, YouTube, you've been doing so good this whole time.
As
Okay.
would you if you found out they weren't
No.
really humans.
No, I wouldn't.
Okay,
Yes.
so he was saying that. No, Vegan Gains is very clear. He is not okay with killing and eating any animal, human or otherwise. Not okay with it.
You would.
I'm vegan. I won't even fucking kill a worm.
What if you found out that white people were really plants? Would you eat them then?
Well, they're clearly
No,
not.
because they're sentient.
Yes.
They're clearly
No,
not, but
because
also
they're sentient.
But you
yeah.
eat plants.
Yeah, they're
he
not
doesn't need
sentient.
sentient plants. Yeah, I
But
guess
what if
that's
we
also a
found-
really good argument of like the dividing line for him is sentience. It just so happens that animals are sentient, so it makes the line very easy. But yeah, like if there were sentient plants, he's also not on board with it. Cool, moving on.
Out there that white people weren't really sentient. You say that's a stupid.
Well,
You'd
Yeah,
say
okay.
that's stupid.
Well,
We
That's
couldn't
then
stupid.
if they
possibly-
weren't
I'm saying- that's
sentient,
what
then
I'm
I would
saying
be
to you.
okay
No,
with killing white people.
I would argue that that's logically impossible. Determining sentience is the kind of thing that you can't like objectively do. You can't like. There's not like a sentience gene or something like there's no like sentienceometer or whatever. Like there are signs you can look for that imply sentience, and that's all we have for literally anybody. As far as any of us know, we're the only sentient person in the entire or like creature in the entire world. As far as any of us know, everyone else could be just like a meat machine that's operating and like doesn't actually think or whatever. The reason why we don't behave that way is because there are signs that we can use to estimate like, well, this seems like it's pretty likely to correspond with sentience, things like the thoughts people will express and so on and so forth. We couldn't really demonstrate that someone isn't sentient. We could only look for signs. In fact, as Hexic was mentioning on Thursday, it's possible that plants are sentient and we would never know it because the signs we're looking for are pretty specific. So like no, it's not really possible, but I guess vegan gains would be kind of locked into saying that yes, I guess it'd be okay to kill and eat them. But at that point, like, what's anyone's problem with that? I guess Dr. J's problem is like, well, they're made in the image of God, like, but the real problem is like, well, you're not causing. The
Okay,
real thing is like you're not
and
causing
in that
harm or
sense, I'm
suffering.
agree.
Yeah, if they
I
were
agree with that.
robots or some sort of machine that
In
was
that
that
sense, I
didn't
would
think
agree
or
with you.
feel, then sure.
In that sense, I would agree with you. But in the same
Well,
way, my
no,
question to
no,
you
that's
doesn't
totally
help.
different.
No, it's
So,
not
all right,
totally different.
Vegan
It's the
Games has
same,
finally
which is
done a
why
really
Well,
good
it's
that's
job
a
of, like,
value.
nailing Dr. J
Well,
down on
wait,
something,
wait,
and he's
wait. That's a value of
squirming and wiggling
sentience,
out of
whereas your
everything.
valuing something else.
But then you make up a scenario which is just absolutely wild, and then say, "See,"
Well, yeah,
and then I come up
okay,
with a
so
scenario
like
that
the objection to hypotheticals is a pretty surefire. Is a pretty good tell that the person is trying to run away from the implications of their position and like very frequently are being dishonest. Like, yes, it's a ridiculous hypothetical, but ridiculous hypotheticals can lead us to understanding your position better. This is exactly why I do these are the questions. Is like one of the reasons, and yeah, the fact that he's he is now all of a sudden 45 minutes in opposed to the concept of hypotheticals because it's ridiculous is like it's pretty telling.
absolutely wild.
You just don't like where you got
and
led
you
to.
think, boy, this is kind of dumb, which is what I'm exactly thinking of. I
No.
want you to demonstrate
don't
that
like the
yours isn't
logical
consistent. You
conclusion
let me ask for a
of your
little while,
beliefs.
and you've been dominating, asking me questions for a very long time, and it seems like
Oh,
your
now
system
now
of trying
he's
to prove
indignant
veganism
about
is
the
by
course of the
trying to
conversation.
attack other
Yeah.
people when you are the one that actually has to demonstrate it's right. Not other people in a
now he
ad hominem
has.
way, but attacking other people's moral systems. Moral systems are very difficult. Moral systems are very complicated. It's extremely hard.
Well,
to
yeah, I
Well-
mean it is, but your solution to that is to just be like, fuck it, my daddy told me that this is what's right and wrong. So like, I don't know that you get to take the high ground of like, oh, it's so hard to make a moral position. You in your life absolved yourself of that difficulty just because at least Vegan Gains is trying.
With
extremely
you,
hard. And so
Clearly,
you are,
your moral
but-
system isn't all that complicated because you just say,
Great. Mine's wrong. Now
God,
prove to me
though.
that veganism's correct.
Well, yours is the only objection you had. Okay, so now the nature of the conversation is very different. Vegan Gains has laid out his argument again. So now we can't be like, oh, well, he didn't do that. He did. Now every time Dr. J says you didn't lay out your argument, he's literally lying and not correct about like, well, Vegan Gains hasn't made his case. Now Dr. J is wrong about that. And the only counter argument has been, well, humans are made in the image of God, therefore they are different than animals, but that's been torn apart. It is relevant now what your basis is because you have no other counter argument. Now that
Right,
we've like
so,
figured
well,
I've
out
already
the problem,
granted
Vegan
that
Gains
my
has no
view.
arguments.
again,
Now-
what
now
I
prove to me
stated.
that veganism
So
is
wait,
actually
wait,
something
wait,
wrong.
wait. What I stated at the beginning of the debate is there's no way for you to justify meat eating without taking away human rights, and I just demonstrated that. So my
So
point was
you
proven.
did not demonstrate it.
The
And I
only
have
way,
said that
the
you
only
can-
way for you to justify killing and eating animals
Excellent.
is by also
Phenomenal
being okay with
argumentation
killing and
here.
eating people.
you have said
Identified exactly what he just got out of his opponent. Like, made sure his point was established, made clear the relevance of what just occurred, uh, and was dead on as to why it matters. Perfect argument there.
Humans and animals have the same rights, but you will not give the same rights to animals that humans have.
But
Therefore,
this is
you're
so
inconsistent.
this was
The
actually a good
problem is
argument that
you're
he made
inconsistent
earlier, and it
compared to
hasn't really
mine.
been
Wait,
addressed.
Is
what's
that
the
you are
inconsistency?
Well,
you will not
the
give
right to
animals
home.
the same rights as humans.
Yes, I do.
No, you
No,
don't.
the right to
Because if
home was
you
the big
take
one.
their house,
But I
even
guess
if
he
it's
also
their
kind of wants
house
to.
only because
He's kind of opposed to the right
because
to
of
home for some
squatters'
humans.
rights, you would be okay with it, and that's not granting the same
Yeah, no.
same.
So
So
if
therefore,
there
that's
were,
inconsistent. And the problem with your inconsistency is you're trying to make people do something. You're trying to put a moral burden on them that they don't have before. I'm not trying to put moral burden on them before. So you have to demonstrate give animals all the same rights as humans. I've given you one example that I think you're incorrect, that you're giving them equal rights, and I think I have some more if you would let me have a chance to talk about
So
them.
this is where I think like both of them, in my estimation, are wrong in this debate. By the way, there's not always someone who proves themselves right. The I, Dr. J is completely wrong about whether it's okay to kill and eat animals, and that's been demonstrated clearly. Um, but Vegan Gains is, I think, wrong about like the in totality of human rights should be applied to animals. He hasn't made clear where exactly those are, but even he doesn't really agree with it because the right to home, as laid out by Dr. J, was something that like Vegan Gains was like, it's not really the same, and like, yeah, it actually would be okay if and the difference is, we have a society or whatever. Like he had to like dance around it, but like ultimately it was right. Like the attempt to give all the same rights that humans have to animals is just not feasible or reasonable. Um, but some of them definitely are, and that's what like I don't know, Vegan Gains mostly focuses on as, but has left himself open to this problem because he said all the rights, not just the protection from being killed and eaten. And Dr. J even gave him at the outset the option of taking that position, and Vegan Gains wanted a more difficult one to defend, so he ended up like not being able to prove it. Probably not going to keep up with this very much longer, but I also expect that we're going to get to Q&A fairly soon, and as per usual, we'll be skipping that. It's just not particularly helpful. People don't know how to ask good questions often, and also uh, without the ability for a follow-up, a single question often doesn't lead us to where we want to go.
But for some
yeah,
reason, you think that tearing
so
me down is somehow going to help you.
Well,
yeah,
you had a counter argument, so
if
tearing
there
down
were
your counter
human
argument is
beings
important.
who
Yeah.
were, say, living in a tree, sort of like how a bird lives in a tree, I wouldn't have a problem with forcing those humans to move to make room for, I don't know, like a
And
condo.
this is where like Dr. J is right. That's kind of monstrous, actually. Yeah, forcing people to move so that you can build shit. You're describing an ethnic cleansing. In this case, not ethnic, but like, uh, it's displacement is a harm that happens when it happens to people and like to animals as well. And in order to justify homes for humans, you have to be okay with displacing both people and animals, and like that's kind of ridiculous. Um, like I don't think it's appropriate for anyone to be forced from their home. The thing I would say is that it's a matter of ought implies can. We need shelter. In as much as we can create homes and buildings and whatever without displacing wildlife, we should. But in as much as we can't, we have no other choice. And so that's why it's not a problem for the position I've taken. But Vegan Gains went the other way of just saying, no, it's cool to displace people. That's fine.
You
So
wouldn't?
where's the contradiction?
What? So if I decided to build a treehouse
By the way, this would
on
like
land,
justify taking the land of nomadic people, by the way. Like, oh, you don't have an actual home, you just like move up and move around all the time, so it's fine for me to like just take this. But like no, because like you're hurting people by doing that. This is like they might not like have an established building there, but this is their home. And I think put in those terms, Vegan Gains probably would would agree with me, but like, I
And
don't
that
know.
I was there before you were, hundreds of
Treehouse
years.
is a lot
my-
different
my-
than
my-
living in a hole in a tree or having a bundle of sticks in a tree.
There was a giant webwood
That
tree
is
that I dug it out
some
and lived
like
in it.
that.
And me and
That kind of logic is the exact kind of logic that he's been trying to argue against. Of like okay, animals don't like have like the sentience of animals. Like someone could argue that their sentience is lesser than humans because they're less intelligent or whatever, and like it's the same kind of argument of like it's not the same thing that's less important or whatever. It's the same kind of like, you know, because it's different and I consider it lesser, therefore it doesn't deserve the same consideration. That's what people use to justify meat eating. It's the same kind of logic, and it's really weird to me that Vegan Gains goes in for it. Oh my.
and my ancestors had lived in it for 100 years, you would say it's all totally cool for you to come rip it out and build a condo on my instead of my tree?
A hole in a tree it lacks a claim of ownership.
It
Because
does not.
animals are
All
incapable of
you
claiming
don't even
ownership, but they
have to, like,
could. Like
have a
like Vegan Gains. If that tree were in my backyard, in land I owned, I don't own land, but whatever. Like you get the idea. Then it would not lack a claim of ownership, right? And so if I had the deed to that land and I don't know, somehow it's a massive tree and I'm living in the hole in it, all right? You would understand, like, that property claim argument wouldn't apply, but you would have to be as on, like, and so what, now you're not on board for removing me from the hole in the tree, but animals can't make property claims. So you're not okay with them having the same rights because those rights are contingent on what they can claim. Okay, humans claim the right, like can sue in courts about whether they get killed. Not the person directly, but someone on behalf of them. And animals don't. There's the distinction. Like it's so obvious when you put it in those way, like how nonsense this position is. Yet I don't know. Like it's just wild that he goes for it. Like, okay, animals can't make the legal claims about like their torture, so it's cool then.
House, as long as you have, you have some kind of place that you're living, squatters' rights alone, right? I mean,
Yeah, I don't necessarily believe in
so you don't think we
squatters'
stole?
rights.
We don't.
And like,
We didn't
look at what he
steal
has
the
to
land
throw
from
out.
the
Like
Indians because they
his
didn't have,
argument was like you'd have to throw out some amount of human rights to justify meat eating. Like he's throwing out tons of human rights to justify veganism, and it's so weird because he doesn't have to.
buildings on them. That was all free reign.
Yeah, so well, the Indian issue is different.
How?
Oh, is it
we
different?
We didn't
Yeah.
take their land according to your
Yep,
definition
they didn't
of
make
land.
property claims
They
about
didn't
it in
have
the same
houses
way.
on it.
Or at least some.
Well,
some
again,
tribes didn't make property claims
the
about it
Indian
the same way.
issue is a bit different.
Why?
Those people were completely displaced.
Yeah, so was a lot of
You're not
wildlife.
necessarily displaced. So you're not necessarily.
Completely displaced. They're not.
So like, for what it's worth, like there's a line here that Vegan Gains would draw but hasn't yet, which is that he said it can be okay to displace wildlife to make homes. The reason why he said can be is he undoubtedly would have issues with certain ways in which that could happen, like clearing an entire forest or something, that like a complete displacement. This is a line he hasn't explicitly drawn like in those terms, but it's kind of reasonable. Like I kind of get what he's saying, but no, it's not like fundamentally different. Like, okay, if they were shoved, like I guess what's happening in Israel, if the Palestinians, all right, they weren't completely removed from the land, they were only shoved into this small portion of it. That's cool. No, obviously not.
They have,
Sorry?
have a tiny little bit of land. They have a little bit of land.
Yep, they do.
Well, they were
They just
displaced
had to
and
move.
genocided.
yeah,
They were
they just have
displaced
to move
and
like that.
genocided.
but the genocide
That-
part.
that's
Well,
the
so
we
issue.
can both. The genocide isn't the
Okay,
part
but
I'm
you're
talking about,
okay
which I
with
agree,
the
but you're
displacement as
saying
long
that
as it
taking
didn't come with the
genocide
genocide?
was bad, but the taking the land was okay. If we wouldn't have killed, if
Dr.
the
Just
settlers wouldn't have
completely
killed
right
anybody,
here, and it's
then it
crazy that
would have
he
been
is.
okay because they didn't have an official house on it. I mean, I do not think you're giving the same rights to
Well-
animals that you would to humans.
So again,
Oh.
in the human context, there are certain pieces of land that are arable and non-arable. There's certain areas that you have to live in so that you can actually exist. Like you have to be close enough to a water source.
Wait, does he think that's
If you're
different
displacing
with
people
animals?
in a certain way where, yeah, you're going to actually affect their ability to live. Again, it's a lot more complicated to move human beings
Yeah,
than
no,
to say
he's dancing
move a
around it.
bird from one
He's
tree to
just
another.
wrong.
Just like the level of inconvenience seems to be the issue for you here, and you
Yeah,
just are
essentially.
convinced.
Well, essentially, it might.
No, I
You could
think the
maybe say
American
it goes
Indians
beyond
didn't
the
care
level
how
of
much they were
inconvenience.
inconvenienced or not inconvenienced. They wanted all their land that was theirs, and when it got taken from them, I think most people would agree that's a violation of rights. In the same way that when you take the grazing land of animals to build your house, you're taking away their rights.
Well, not exactly.
Nope, he's
I
completely
don't want to
right.
get into a whole Native American history. There were agreements to actually take land, or take,
I agree some
or
of that
have.
Okay,
happened. I
even if
agree that
that's
Yeah.
true,
getting in the
even if
debate.
that's true, like the coerciveness of those agreements is one of those things like we can speculate on. Maybe some people who are appraised on history know about, but like I can imagine that coercion was an issue. Like, yeah, you'll agree to some amount of concessions if the alternative is like you've been being massacred repeatedly. But even aside from that, like, so the fact that animals can't engage in contracts it makes it okay, but like that shouldn't there be more protections, not fewer, because they're incapable? It seems weird that you're just like, well, they're lesser, so like fuck it, we can do whatever, we can do what we want in this regard. This is again justification for the exact kind of thing that Dr. J has been talking about. Maybe like I don't know enough about like the specific history. Like maybe it doesn't exactly apply 1-to-1 with Native Americans, though. I wouldn't be surprised if it did. The the point remains, like, it justifies so much terrible shit to just be like, well, no, displacement isn't an inherent harm.
Of all that is probably not
Well,
worth it. Just use
you're talking about people who didn't really have a complex understanding of ownership and contracts and stuff like that. That's why there's the term Indian trader.
So yeah, so you can take animals' lands because they
Okay.
don't have a complex understanding of land rights.
Well, again, the issue I'm seeing is.
And by the way, Dr. J is also maneuvering him to naming the trait himself, intelligence. And while that intelligence does not, in my view, justify killing and eating, it's not okay to like kill and eat an infant human, even though they're not very intelligent. It does justify certain rights being restricted from them. That Vegan Gains is implying would be applied, like should be. Yeah, I don't know.
Animals are not developing the land and have a requirement to live in very specific
Whoa, that
certain
they don't
areas
develop the land.
where
First of all, animals absolutely develop the land. They just do it differently. And not all of them, but some of them do. As I understand, like certain trees rely on it. Part of the reason why they're able to sustain the species or whatever is because squirrels will like it will like gather their nuts, bury them, and then forget where they are. Like that's cultivating the land. It's not done intentionally, but it is doing it. But also that insistent. That's also like it's another like colonialist. Well, they're not being productive with the land, so we can take it from them. That's been an argument made before. It's an argument being made now when it comes to Canadian indigenous people and like their land rights. It's like, well, they're not being productive on the land, so like fuck them. Is an argument being made right now.
they can really make a claim to ownership. It's sort of like when you find homeless people who've made an encampment in a particular area.
But you were okay
Telling
with
somebody to
shunting them.
move a couple blocks down the street and set up shop there is a lot different than getting somebody to like literally move a home that they've purchased.
But
They've set up like an entire.
It's so much worse for the homeless person. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, yeah, I get the person. Like, I get that you have to do more to move if you have a home than if you don't. But you also have the means for the homeless. You're just cool with homeless encampments getting shunted around. Like, that's again one of the worst things. It's one of the terrible things that happens to homeless people that human rights activists on the subject fight against. It's wild that he's okay with
entire lifestyle there, like versus a bird living in a tree that just needs to grab a bunch of sticks and put them in another tree.
But if you could move to and live in a place that didn't displace all those people, that would surely be better and be a more moral decision.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
I don't think.
And we have an obligation to do that as much as we can.
Are you arguing that we should?
We should prefer places that come with less displacement to places that come with more. I don't know if like Vegan Gauge should be on board for that, but like he hasn't. like he doesn't seem to have like a he seems to have a very binary view of morality, and also like a very and like doesn't seem to consider the idea that ought implies can.
Houses in the place that only displaces the least amount of animals as possible.
Yeah.
Like that's a
Maybe.
moral.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe again.
now, Dr. Jamie, the
the
argument
other
that
issue
for
is
vegan games
wild
that we should have made
animals
already.
do live in conditions that are extremely difficult, especially when you're considering they're predated upon by other predatory animals. And if you reduce their territorial space, you are going to reduce the number of these wild animals, and thus the number of these animals that are going to die
Yeah, but you were
very
okay
brutal,
with that.
violent deaths. That's another consideration I make.
But
Right.
you were okay
So
with that.
when you, well, I'll switch directions because I think I'm we're probably good on that question. You
no,
are
you
okay with
should have
owning a
sealed
cat
it, but
if they. I should just
he
ask.
has a cat.
I don't want to
owner.
put words in
We
my mouth.
saw
Are
him in
you
the
okay
background.
with owning a pet, depending on the conditions?
Yeah, so if they're rescued and you're feeding them a vegan diet, then I
Oh
don't
my
see any
god,
issue with
do
it.
not.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh,
So the vegan diet for pets is like you have to be very careful with that shit. Like, like the nutrition is a big deal. Like, okay, like maybe he's doing it ethically, but like, oh my god, is that like immediately scary because people there's that like thing of like, oh, I have my dog is a vegetarian, doesn't eat meat, and like they die of malnutrition because like they need nutrients too, and I don't know.
the
Maybe he's
number one
supplementing it.
cause
He's
of
probably
bird
being
deaths.
like we saw his animals, they look like they're pretty healthy. He's probably like when he says a vegan diet, he probably means like paying attention to their nutrition. It's difficult, but you can do it, and it seems like he probably does.
Is by domesticated cats. So they are a
Yeah,
predator.
don't let them outside.
So it's immoral to let your cat outside.
That's correct.
Whoa, okay,
Okay.
that's I mean
I have a cat.
Isn't that
I only let him
incarceration?
outside when he's on a leash. I do walk him and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I definitely cannot get behind the idea that it is immoral for animals to be predators. That's just like it'd be better if they weren't, but like holy shit, can they not process that?
And I feed him a vegan diet.
Right. And so when you see a cat outside, you're saying, boy, whoever let that cat outside's immoral.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Not only is
No,
it
this is consistent.
not
even
in
if
the
it
best
sounds
interest
bad.
of other wild animals like birds, it's not even in the best interest of the cat. Cats get killed and eaten by coyotes. They get run over by cars. They can collect diseases.
This,
Fleet.
by the way, is actually a very good argument as opposed to the one he was making before. But like, yeah, it's you're doing like to keep your pet safe is one of the obligations you have as a pet owner.
These
You're not
mites.
doing that if you let them out.
So
on their own.
I don't see, unless you have like something like a catio, where you have an enclosed outdoor space where other wild animals can't get to them and the cat is safe. I don't see.
I haven't heard that term before, but
ethical-
I do know people who have an equivalent of that. They wouldn't call it a catio, but like it meets the qualifications of like, yeah, it's an outdoor space that is enclosed. It's not. Yeah, it's
a
just
way
weird
of just letting a cat free roam outside.
Mm-hmm. So what about in situations like poor situations where they have a cat or they have a situation where it's either the human lives or the animal lives? Which are they equal? So for example, if you and I were both on a desert island and one of them, I don't want to sound crazy here, or
Yeah,
make
now
it
he wants
sound
to do
something
his
really
weird hypotheticals because hypotheticals are
what I
reasonable.
was unappreciative what I thought you were doing or whatever. If there's an animal and there's a human and one of them needs to die, do you see them as just totally
So there's nothing wrong with hypotheticals. I'll lay out the hypothetical that he wanted to put out a second ago. You crash land on a deserted island, whatever. It like there's no food source available immediately, but you're on the island with an animal that like could also eat you. I don't know. I don't know. You have a gun, so you can fight off the predator or whatever. And like, okay, one of you is gonna kill and eat the other, and if neither of you do, you both die. Like, is it reasonable for one to eat the other, and what preference should there be, or would you have if it were you? Stuff like that. That's what he's trying to ask.
equal, or do you have a preference one or the other?
Sure. So I may have a preference one way or the other for who lives, who dies.
Mhm.
I would consider, say, how long one being's going to live. So let's say if it's two humans,
Mhm.
one human I know is
So
very
he's already answered this in a way that should let him off the hook for this question, which is that his criteria for making that determination is not on species lines. I personally disagree, but um, but it is fully consistent with what he said for him to have answered this way. And honestly, if I were in Dr. J shoes, we can just move on. You've already answered it in a way that demonstrates your consistency. All right, we're good.
elderly. They're only going to live like maybe 2, 3 years after they get rescued by sailors or something. Versus somebody who's much younger, I'd probably prefer the younger person to live, older person to die.
Sure.
So when you're talking about
Which,
like
by
an
the way, does end up making the preference towards humans because humans live longer than most animals. So it ends up landing in a very similar place. But um, like he's demonstrated his consistency. There shouldn't be anything else here.
animal, I animals don't usually live as long as human beings. That might be
Oh,
a
he even said as
consideration I
much.
make. Might also consider like future well-being. The types of experiences that a human can have might generate much more
And by
well-being
the way,
than
if he had
the types of
made clear
experiences an
that he holds
animal
like
may
an ought
have.
implies can type thing, where like, yeah, you should avoid eating another animal if you can help it. This doesn't. This isn't even a question that you have to ask, and it lets him off the hook for a lot of the other insane shit that he said. But I guess he's just on board for the insane shit. So I don't know.
You do
So
see that in the same as humans though? Whichever human, like if there were someone that you thought could I
well,
assume you wouldn't make
I
that
mean, if there were
distinction.
two
I think you're
humans,
Then you're
talking about
getting into
they
something
could apply the same kind of stuff.
slightly. So I think you're
Okay.
talking about something slightly different than I am. I think you're trying to ask like, would it be okay to kill and eat, like an animal or something like that
Oh,
in
was
a
that not what you
survival
were answering?
situation? I would say no.
I,
Oh,
The
what the
ethical
fuck?
thing to
okay.
do would be to starve.
Okay.
Yeah, I cannot. I mean, I've made
But
clear
And
why
so
I
let me
can't get
let
on
me
board
ask
for
you
that
this.
ever.
yes,
So
It
yes.
let's
drives me
say
insane that like these arguments are like the Weekend is so close to right, and then here's Vegan Gain saying some insane shit that like absolutely I could never get on board for.
there were two people starving on a deserted island. They're waiting to get rescued.
Mm-hmm.
One
The
human
ethical thing is
being
to do
was
is
made
to
in the
die.
image of God. One human
Mm-hmm.
being wasn't made in the
Mm-hmm.
image of God. Would you be okay with the human made in the image of God killing and eating the human not made in the image?
By the way, he probably doesn't need to bring the image of God into this scenario. If you just have two humans, then Dr. J would be on board. But I guess it doesn't pose a challenge to him to not introduce that. I don't know. This
Of
feels
God.
like not that helpful.
Well, that is like a totally made up scenario that isn't real, which obviously I wouldn't
All of it is what?
hate even ascribing something to because it's not real. But
Now he's opposed to
of course, if there
hypotheticals
was someone
again.
who is a human and someone who would can be considered not a human, that would be okay.
Well, no. You're changing the hypothetical. They're both
But I
humans.
see humans
He's not gonna
and the
go. He's not
image
gonna fall for
of
this, Vegan
God
Gains.
being the same thing. So you want to
So
rip them
so
apart, and
no
I'm
no no
saying they
no
can't be
no
ripped
no
apart. If you're
no.
going to
Except
call them a
So
human, I'm saying
you
they
that's
have to
not
admitted
be
they
made in
true.
the
could
image of
be
God.
So that's not
previous.
true. We
Okay,
already
all right.
covered this. You're using a different semantic
But we've
definition
also
of
like
human.
I also don't like going back to this because Vegan Gains you already took this argument apart clearly. Like he was very clearly wrong. The only like at this point that counter argument has fallen and he's approaching a different one. And the other counter argument that he's trying to make now is that your positions are inconsistent. Now you've defended that consistency, but you've shown yourself to be consistent in this most recent hypothetical, though like at every turn when you demonstrate that you're consistent, you say something batshit and indefensible. So like that you're attacking the wrong problem thing, the wrong argument.
You already admitted that it's logically possible for humans to exist without God.
It's logically possible.
Right. So if it's
Just in,
logically
just in,
possible, then we're both talking about the same being. So a human and a human, one human's not made in the image of God, one human is made in the image of God.
right. Just because it's logically possible that it can happen doesn't mean it could
Right, and we're
happen.
talking about the
First of all,
hypothetical.
yes, it
We're
does.
not
It does
talking
mean
And
that.
about
I already
whatever world you believe you live in.
It
I
does
already
mean that, Dr.
granted you
J.
the hypothetical.
No, you didn't. You altered the condition of the
Oh
hypothetical
God,
where both
are we
humans are
almost
made in the
done?
image of God. Or sorry, you rejected the hypothetical and you said
I
it's
think we'll
not
get to
I don't
possible
Q&A
reject
for
soon.
it.
a
I
human not
grant
to be made in the
I grant you the I just clarified that not the hypothetical can't exist. The hypothetical can exist, but the actual thing I don't think would exist. If it did,
Well, that's fine.
yeah, right. And in the hypothetical,
So
yes.
so in the hypothetical, you'd be okay with a human killing and eating another human so long as they're killing and eating a human not made in the image of God.
Actually, given the response that he's had to this question, if he said he's okay, I'll let him say yes.
Well, yes or no?
Okay. Okay, that's kind of weird because you would expect that, like, I would expect that he would say if they were both made in the image of God, that it'd be okay to kill and eat for one of them to kill and eat the other because they have no choice. But it sounds like maybe he wouldn't. Like if he's gonna fight over that part of the hypothetical, maybe he wouldn't say that. I don't know.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess
This might be a good time to go in the Q&A.
absolutely
Yeah,
right.
sure.
Nuance,
I'm
this
ready
is
for
a
it.
perfect time to go into Q&A, and with that we'll wrap it. Both of them agreed to some wacky shit in defending their positions, which is, I guess people are like that, but I expected it less from Vegan Gains because I just think that the vegan position is so much more defensible than than the position that it's okay to eat meat. Uh, yeah, that was a crazy debate. And this is I mentioned this throughout, and this is something that keeps being an issue for me. Of like, I agree with the vegans mostly in principle, but then when they debate, they're just completely off. Like, I just can't bring myself to agree with what they're saying in the debate, or like their approach is completely wrong. Like Alex O'Connor, I think his approach was completely wrong, and he wanted to make it an individual thing, and like I can't agree with that. And then Vegan Gains wanted to say the wildest shit that like he just did not, just the most ridiculous unforced errors of like, nah, displacement isn't a problem, and like, well, they don't have property claims, so it's cool, and like, no, if like two human or like if like, oh, what was it, it's like if you have to eat each other to survive, like, no, don't do that, you have a moral obligation to die, like, what the fuck. um and it does make me wonder about what his ethical system is. Dr. J was like kept pressing him on it. It wasn't really necessary, but I am curious now of like what moral system do you like? You can't be a consequentialist, right? Because in the scenario where one of these two needs to eat the other to live, or they both die, and you say they should both die, like that's the worst of all scenarios, right? It both are dead. So like, what is this? Maybe it's deontology. It's probably a deontology where like it's wrong in principle, therefore you do it, and like you end up at a moral obligation to die, but it's actually a moral obligation to not kill and eat another thing, and that leads you to needing that. Okay, sure, whatever. But like, oh my god, this is my problem with vegan debates. Is like they should be right, but then they cannot argue, and they say the wildest shit sometimes. Oh wow! Thanks for sticking with it. Those of you who did, I am quite pooped after that debate. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. We'll be back tomorrow. Probably not gonna have a long stream tomorrow because it's Halloween. I know people want to do shit, so we'll figure out what we do. But I hope you all found that interesting and valuable. I mean, I did, even though it was really weird and crazy. People, they just did not have to admit to the things they had to. They weren't arguing. I don't know. Sometimes they would argue really, really well. Both of them. Sometimes their arguments were great, and then they just did not understand. And then they would follow that up immediately with like arguing the wrong thing, or making a really terrible argument, or not realize what's happening, or like what their opponent's saying. It was crazy. Whatever. Thanks all for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time. All right, bye.